Chapter 434. After disembarking from the god of war and entering the Holy Crown City, he rushed to the original base of Riptide and saw some incredible scenes. Many priests became very active. They went to the streets and preached their doctrines. They even left various slogans on the walls at both ends of the street, such as, "If you want God to save you, you have to save yourself first. This land of blasphemers will only be despised by God. Freedom of faith. Long live freedom." Wait, what was more interesting was that Hanjin also saw a strange slogan. There were 3 lines, symmetrical on the left and right. On the left side of the first line was a line of white characters, "Great God of Light," and on the other side in bright red, "God of Death, full of rotten stench." On the left side of the second line was a holy angel, and on the right side was an evil abyss demon. On the left side of the last line was the Church of Justice, and on the right side was a big question mark. The meaning was obvious. The one who fought against the God of Light was the God of Death, and the one who fought against the angels was the devil. Then what was the one who fought against the Church of Justice? It was the first time that Hanjin had seen such a heuristic slogan. He almost laughed out loud on the spot. However, among the various standards, most of them were allusions to Hanjin. No one dared to write out Hanjin's name. Many eloquent priests took turns to give speeches on the street. There were many onlookers. To be honest, there were too few forms of entertainment in this world, especially for ordinary civilians. Listening to the priest's speeches was also a way to pass time. When the patrols of the security bureau passed by, they did not interfere with the priests and just pretended that they did not see them. It was a bit pretentious. Hanjin sighed in his heart. Chief Magistrate Schumann was one of his men, and the Security Bureau followed his will. It was precisely because the Security Bureau allowed the clergy to do whatever they wanted and never interfered that Jedis had suspected him. Did Adolf notice it as well? What would he do? While pondering, Hanjin and Sasu approached the barracks. Knowing that Hanjin was coming, Schumann and Chipango rushed to the barracks and waited at the gate. "Sir, you are finally back." Schumann sighed with mixed feelings. "My lord, Hallister was his good friend, and their relationship was no worse than that of Hanjin and Morrison's. However, because of his status, he couldn't go to Hallister's door and ask for mercy. He didn't even dare to ask Hanjin for mercy, because Hanjin had other plans, and he was one of the people in charge. He couldn't do anything rash, so he kept his anger in his heart. After holding it in for so long, of course his expression wasn't good. "The two of you have done well." Hanjin smiled. "Actually, I didn't do anything." Schumann smiled and said, "It's just that I become friends with Bishop Heish. For his sake, I naturally can't go and deal with those believers. Heish is very grateful to me." Seashell? Did he support those priests? Hanjin was stunned. Heishai's was Chipango's main public relations target, and Heishai's used to be very conservative. Why did he suddenly become radical? "No, I often see him teaching those priests a lesson," Schumann replied, "but it seems that he can't control the situation. Even Jeds can't control it, let alone him." With these words, Cortini walked up from behind. "Cortini, why are you here?" Hanjin couldn't help but frown. He arranged for Cortini to live in the city to get him out of the public sight. He had other plans. "My lord, I have no choice." Chipango continued, "Those guys are too bold. They dare to attack Miss Chi Li in the Holy Crown City. Is there anything they won't do? I'm afraid they will break into the barracks and attack Miss Chi Li again. You took everyone away. I can't trust the people of the Holy See, so I can only go to Cortini." "Did anything happen?" Hanjin asked. "No, it's been peaceful these days." Hanjin pondered for a moment and said, "Let's go and see Chi Li, my lord, this way." Chipango stepped aside. This was a fixed barracks. Of course, the soldiers wouldn't live in tents. In the past, Dismark had built rows of relatively simple barracks, but Chipango had chosen a very inconspicuous room to house Chi Li, which was connected to the kitchen. Judging from the smoke on the wall, it seemed that it was the cook's room. It could be seen that Chipango was short of manpower. He didn't even dare to protect Chi Li openly, but had to hide. As the head of the Secret Service in the Holy Crown City, it was ironic that Chipango had no sense of security. This was also a warning to Han Jin that in addition to expansion, he still had many important things to improve. Tiny, how's your investigation? Han Jin asked while walking. My lord, when I first received your message, I didn't believe it at all. Tiny smiled bitterly. Most of my brothers have followed my lord Zagund since a long time ago. They have experienced a lot together. I really didn't believe that there was a spy among them. But later, I talked with Miss Chi Li for a long time. The problem should be with them. It seems that you still haven't found out. I need time, my lord. Tiny said, although there were only 6 people I sent to Black Raven City to find Miss Chi Li, I can't rule out that they communicated with each other after they came back and leaked the information. It can be said that all of them are suspects. Even I can't get rid of it. Tiny, since I can inform you in the first place, it proves that I trust you. Han Jin interrupted Tiny and then said slowly, whether you feel guilty or want to test me, don't say such words in the future. My lord, why would I test you? Tiny smiled bitterly again. I don't feel good. You trusted me and gave me such an important task, but in the end, it's just an accident. Han Jin changed the topic. Have you been with Chipango often these days? Yes, I haven't left the camp for more than 10 days, Tiny said. Among the people guarding Chi Li, Tiny was the strongest. Others could leave, but he didn't dare to. Do you have any suggestions? Han Jin said. Tiny was an experienced head of the Secret Service, so his advice would be very valuable, while Chipango was a newbie. Only by being good at learning would he be able to avoid detours. Suggestions? You're referring to... Kearney's eyes shifted to Chipango. Are you referring to Lord Chipango's suggestion? Not only for him, but also for me. Han Jin smiled. Tell me. My Lord Chipango needs new blood. The power he has is too weak, Tiny said. In his eyes, Chipango's subordinates were insignificant characters. Spies were supposed to be the most secretive and sharpest daggers in the hands of their masters. When their own people were attacked, they should return a tooth for a tooth, blood for blood, or think of a way to set up a trap to deal a fatal blow to the assassins. They shouldn't pray in secret that the assassins wouldn't come to their door. This kind of thing can't be rushed. It's better to have nothing than to have something substandard. Han Jin said, do you have any other suggestions? Tiny could tell that Han Jin wanted him to teach Chipango more. So he smiled. My lord, since I have nothing to do now, let me be my lord Chipango's assistant for the time being. All right. Han Jin nodded. My lord, I have a suggestion. Shumon suddenly interrupted. Go ahead. Didn't the leader of the Dragon Singer mercenary group, my lord Dwight Steele, bring a lot of mercenaries with him? Shumon said, my lord Chipango was also a mercenary, and he used to live in isolated Cliff City. You should know a lot of people and can choose from those mercenaries. That's right. Han Jin said. Chipango, what do you think? Go get in touch with those mercenaries and pick a few of the smarter ones. I can do it, but I'm not as good at judging people as Hallister. Sigh, if only he could help me. You brat, you want me to go and rescue them? Han Jin shook his head with a smile. Of course he needs to be saved, but now is not the time. Don't worry, Hallister will be fine. Chipango opened his mouth and wanted to beg again, but Han Jin had already set the tone for this matter, so he could only suppress his emotions. While they were talking, the group had already arrived at the door. Han Jin pushed the door open and walked in. Although the house looked dirty from the outside, the decorations inside were very exquisite. Chipango must have taken Chi Li's identity into consideration and spent a lot of effort on it. There were 2 beds inside, and Chi Li and little Joseph, who hadn't seen each other for a long time, were lying on them. There were 5 or 6 chairs next to them, as well as a few strong young men and a maid. When they heard the door open, they all turned around and saw Han Jin. Without saying a word, they pulled out their swords and fiercely pounced on him. What are you doing? Chipango, who had followed them in, shouted. The young men were stunned, holding their swords. They didn't know whether to advance or retreat. Come and greet the Lord, Chipango said angrily. My lord! The young men panicked. They all dropped their swords and knelt on one knee. Get up, Han Jin said calmly, then turned to Chi Li. Perhaps it was because of her injuries, or because she hadn't seen the light of day for a long time, But Chi Li's face was much paler than before. She was already very beautiful, but now her beauty and paleness combined into a kind of sickly beauty. However, she was even more beautiful than before. Chi Li's mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were hazy and filled with mist. One could see how excited she was from her trembling lips. "My lord!" Little Joseph's voice was filled with both joy and surprise. He tried to sit up on the bed, but it seemed that he had touched a wound. His nose and eyes suddenly wrinkled. "Stay here and don't move," Hanjin said, then turned to Chipango. "Where's Sylvia?" "She's on the other side of the camp," Chipango said. "Why did you separate them?" Hanjin didn't understand. "Well," Chipango's face reddened. He didn't know how to answer. "You can't put all your eggs in the same basket," Schumann said with a smile. "My lord, perhaps you haven't heard of this before, but Mr. Chipango knows." Chipango's face reddened even more. He lowered his head, not daring to look at Hanjin. Schumann was exposing his shortcomings, but he didn't intend to blame him. After staying by Hanjin's side for so long, he had his own understanding. When faced with problems, it was better to be honest than to hide them. At least he didn't want to be calculative with Hanjin. Going deeper, if he revealed his shortcomings appropriately and even left a weakness for Hanjin to exploit, perhaps he would be more valued by Hanjin. Hanjin was angry and amused at the same time. "Looks like I really should add more people to your team, or else you won't even have this much confidence." With that, he sat on a chair near Chi Li and turned his gaze back to Chi Li. Chi Li didn't speak, but her eyes were getting misty. Tears seeped out of the corners of her eyes. "Are you all right?" Hanjin asked softly. Chi Li finally spoke, but as soon as she opened her mouth, tears immediately gushed out. She then said in a sobbing tone, "How could you abandon us?" Chi Li was originally a delicate flower in a greenhouse. After her family was destroyed, she had no choice but to leave her hometown. Later, she was protected by Hanjin, Sunir, and the others. At first, she felt inferior and felt that she was a burden to the whole team. However, Hanjin and the others also saw Chi Li's confusion and comforted her. Hanjin, especially, often joked that if Chi Li didn't give him a reward, he would have starved to death. Chi Li also saw everyone's intention to protect her, so she went all out and considered herself as Hanjin's savior. He shouldn't have left his savior behind. "You can't blame me, Chi Li," Hanjin said with mixed feelings. "The elves suddenly attacked us. By the time we reacted, the transportation was already cut off. I wanted to send people to pick you up, but the elf had extremely fast silver Pegasi. If we were discovered by the elves, we were done for. Later on, I sent people to look for you, but they couldn't find you. You can't be blamed? Who is to blame?" Chi Li continued to sob. These days, she had suffered too much and accumulated too many grievances. She had been walking on the edge of life and death. So, of course, she had to vent her feelings when she saw the person she trusted. "It's my fault." Sunir then walked in from outside. When she saw Sunir, Chi Li became even more excited. She ignored her injuries and raised half of her body from the bed and called out, "Sunir." Sunir quickly walked over and sat by the bed. Then, the two of them hugged each other. When they were adventuring in the mountains, the living conditions were very difficult, so they couldn't be too particular. These two women often ate and lived together, so they had a very good relationship. Moreover, Sunir was older than Chi Li and was very strong. She was strong enough to protect Chi Li, so Chi Li gradually played the role of the younger sister. When she saw Sunir, she felt as if she had seen the light of day again. Chi Li couldn't control the excitement in her heart. She didn't care that there were many people around them. She was just sobbing a moment ago, but now she was crying. Don't cry, don't cry." Sunir gently patted Chi Li's back. Seeing that Chi Li had completely lost her composure, Katini, Chipango, and the others knew that it was inconvenient for them to stay. They looked at each other and quietly left, including the few young people and the maids. Sasu and Leger didn't leave. They were very sad, and their eyes were wet. Sunir coaxed Chi Li for a while, and then Sunir sighed. "It's all my fault. If it wasn't for, it's still my fault." Hanjin continued awkwardly. He wasn't sure if Sunir heard him. Although he didn't shirk the responsibility, And what he said was the truth. He was worried that Sunir would feel uncomfortable if he blamed it on the elves. Moreover, why did Sunir suddenly rush over? There was something strange about this. Was she worried? That shouldn't be. When everyone was together, Sunir only treated Chi Li as a weak and helpless woman, a little sister that needed to be taken care of. Sunir was also clear about that. Listen to yourself. What kind of tone is that? Why so reluctant? Sunir said, Keely, is he not sincere at all? Yes. Chi Li nodded vigorously. Let's ignore him. Yes. Chi Li was still nodding. All right, you guys go out. Let us sisters have a private talk. Sunir said. This. Hanjin hesitated for a moment. Chi Li asked me to come. We have something important to talk about. I don't want to talk to you now, Chi Li said while sobbing. If you want to talk to Sunir. Hanjin had been defeated. If it had been someone else who had played a trick on him like this, he would have definitely punished them severely. However, in front of Keely, who had just escaped from the sky and was still in a state of shock, and Sunir, who looked displeased, he didn't have any temper at all. Hanjin looked at Chi Li and then at Sunir. He knew that there was no turning back, so he stood up and walked out. Sasu and Leger comforted him and then followed Hanjin out of the room. My lord, why did you come out so quickly? Chipango was stunned. He was driven out. Sasu interrupted while trying to hold back his laughter. Don't talk so much. Hanjin looked helpless and then looked at Chipango. Right, add another bed and move Sylvia here. Let them stay together. Is that necessary? Leger said, Raphael, won't it be safe if we bring them to the god of war? Why do we have to move them here and there? My lord, you mean, Katini said with a smile. Those people didn't achieve their goal, right? They were scared off by Adolf once, and then chased into the Holy Crown City. This proves that they are very persistent. Why would they give up? It's easy to talk to smart people. Hanjin also smiled. I'm not smart. Leger looked very depressed. You want to use Chi Li and Sylvia to lure them out? Chapter 435. I'm not using them. Hanjin shrugged. I just want to get rid of those annoying flies once and for all. Leger thought about it and didn't say anything. But when he left, he couldn't help but look back at the barracks. Hanjin saw this and couldn't help but chuckle. What? Are you worried that I can't protect them well? Leger's face flashed with embarrassment. He quickly explained, I didn't say that. All right, you don't have to explain. With Raphael here, what are you worried about? Sasu said, let's go back quickly. There's still a big shot waiting on the ship. What big shot? Leger asked curiously. Hallman, the president of the isolated Cliff City Chamber of Commerce. Don't tell me you've never heard of him. Since when did he become a big shot? Leger was even more confused. If it was a few years ago, Hallman would have been a big shot to Leger. But now, whenever Leger mentioned a city lord or a famous person, Leger would only say one thing to that person. Bro, you'll know who the real big shot is after you've been to the God of War. The God of War was indeed a good place. At least it had opened up Leger's eyes. There was only one city lord in a city, but the number of powerful people visiting the God of War could be counted in groups. At this time, Hanjin, who had been walking in front of the two, turned around and said with a smile, Leger, Hallman is not a simple person. He is the uncrowned king of isolated Cliff City. Not only does he control the Chamber of Commerce, he also controls the Mercenary Association. It's just that he has always kept a low profile. So many people don't know about his abilities. Sasu added lightly, You're much more stupid than I thought. Can't you see that? Leger's face stiffened. Just as he was about to retaliate against Su, he was interrupted by Chipango, who was trying hard not to laugh. Sir, we won't be seeing you off, Chipango bowed and said. The faint smile on his face made Leger feel very gloomy. What's there to send? Hanjin casually waved his hand and led Leger and Sasu towards the God of War ship. Some things were hard to end once they started. Hanjin and the other two had already disappeared from Chipango and the other's sight, but the quarrel was still going on. Sasu, even if Hallman is the uncrowned king of isolated Cliff City, how can he compare to Galbin? Could he compare to Shazos of the Dragonfield? Compared to them, Holman is nothing. It seemed that Leger didn't want to give up on this topic so easily. He had already walked quite a distance away, but he still didn't give up. Sasso looked up at the sky and sighed exaggeratedly. Leger, I beg you, stop talking. Don't make me equate you with Morrison's, okay? Hanjin almost laughed out loud. Sassua's words were really good. Leger was so angry that he gritted his teeth, but he couldn't find the words to reply to Sassu. Hanjin smiled and said to Leger, where did the magic crystal cannons on the God of War come from? Leger, don't you know? So what? I'm just a businessman. Although Leger had always rejected the idea of taking over his father's army, the idea of military strength was deeply ingrained in his bones. No matter how rich you are, as long as I have the power, then what's yours will become mine. In this chaotic continent, having superior power would allow you to do whatever you want. This was something that many people believed without a doubt. Hanjin sighed in his heart. He knew that it would be difficult to change Leger's mind. Perhaps the reason why Leger's father had given the army to Lanning was because he knew that Leger might be a qualified assassin, but he would never be a good commander. Holman is not a simple man. He gave us what we needed the most at the most critical time. Without those magic crystal cannons, although we might not have lost, we would have had a hard time winning. The number of casualties would not have been as low as it is now, including Riptide. Even if it's just one less casualty, I think we have a reason to be grateful to him. After hearing Hanjin's words, Leger was moved. From this point of view, he should be grateful to Holman. Sassu had run far away when Leger was angry. Now that Leger's emotions had calmed down, he came over again. Holman is rich, and we lack money. That's the truth. That's why I said he's a big shot. Leger curled his lips in disdain. So what if he's rich? Then according to what you said, the lords of every city should be businessmen. Hanjin shook his head. Rich people might not be qualified to be lords, but as lords, they can't do without money. This time, even Sassu was not on Hanjin's side. He said, it's not as serious as you make it out to be, is it? Actually, I feel that Raphael, as long as you open your mouth, Holman won't object to anything you want. But I don't think that's very good. You should give him some benefits. That's right. Leger chimed in. You're a lord. I don't believe that a mere chairman of a small chamber of commerce would dare to reject you. Looking at the two men in front of him, Hanjin had a strange feeling. If Morrisons were present, then Leger and Sassu would definitely join forces to bully Morrisons. When Morrisons wasn't around, the two of them would often quarrel endlessly. Now, they were joining forces to refute him, but he really enjoyed this feeling. Only when he was with a true friend could he experience this. It was a kind of warmth, a kind of tacit understanding, and an indescribable feeling. People like Chipango who were respectful to Hanjin could only be subordinates. Once the seed of respect was planted in their hearts, it would grow with Hanjin's strength. Why do you have to force it? Isn't it better to cooperate? After a war, soldiers were not the only things that were needed. Where were the weapons and armors to come from? Do you know why the orcs desperately want to expand? It's because they're poor. They only know how to plunder and not produce. Hanjin tried his best to explain in simple terms. He couldn't possibly tell them what an economic war was, could he? Sassu and Leger weren't stupid. After frowning and thinking for a moment, they understood what Hanjin meant. With the support of a powerful chamber of commerce, many problems in terms of resources would be easily solved. However, many lords on the continent directly demanded from the Chamber of Commerce. Moreover, these lords would act as if it was right and proper. They would protect your safety, so you have the obligation to give them some of your assets. Not giving? That's great. This Chamber of Commerce would likely become history, and all the assets of the Chamber of Commerce would naturally belong to that lord. In fact, it was a very simple principle. Although the wool came from the sheep's body, there was no need to kill the sheep for the wool. It couldn't even be considered as asking. It was just plain plundering. In comparison, plundering was obviously the lowest level. Although they were all targeting the Chamber of Commerce, it was obvious that Hanjin's words of cooperation would not only benefit the Chamber of Commerce, but more importantly, give Holman the respect he deserved. After thinking through this, Sassu and Leger no longer had any objections. They changed the topic and chatted happily until they reached the God of War. Hanjin easily jumped onto the deck, but Sassu and Leger couldn't. They could only wait for the gangway to be lowered before slowly climbing up. Oh, right. Leger suddenly thought of something and turned to ask Sassu. Raphael's interest in that guy is understandable. Why are you following suit? Because he's rich. Sassu's answer was simple and concise. Are you that short of money? It's useless to tell you. You don't even know how much money is needed to build a complete magic laboratory. Sassu sighed. What do you need a laboratory for? Didn't Yelena lend her laboratory to you? Leger asked curiously. Sassu turned and stared at Leger. After a while, he said calmly, How long can I borrow it? My whole life. Leger opened his mouth, but couldn't say anything. Sassu was right. If he could own it, who would be willing to borrow it? On the deck, Hallman and Guevara were chatting. When they saw Hanjin, Guevara smiled and waved at him. Hallman stood up and put on a respectful posture. Although Hanjin had always been easygoing, Hallman had always been cautious. Naturally, he didn't want to leave any flaws in his etiquette. A smile appeared on Hanjin's face, and he walked over. However, he paused halfway and frowned imperceptibly. Then, he walked to the table and sat down as if nothing had happened. As Hanjin's vital energy became more and more profound, his senses became more sensitive. Although they weren't close, the conversation between Sassu and Leger still reached Hanjin's ears. It seemed that he had really neglected the feelings of his friends. From Sassu's words, Hanjin could hear the helplessness in Sassu's words. It wasn't that Sassu didn't work hard, but that some things couldn't be achieved with hard work. This was especially true for the profession of magician. It was a profession that burned money. For example, without the support of Grand Duke Solomon, no matter how talented she would never have reached her current level. Of course, the one who burned money the most was Hanjin. No matter how extravagant a magician was, he wouldn't eat magic crystals. Therefore, from this point of view, Hanjin understood Sassu very well. He felt a little guilty. Maybe he could let Sassu enter that room. You don't have to be so courteous. Just based on your friendship with Mr. Guevara, I should be the one being more respectful. Hallman smiled to Hallman as he was deep in thought. You don't have to be so courteous. I wouldn't dare. Hallman smiled until his eyes were squinted. Regardless of whether Hanjin's words were sincere or not, at least he had praised Hallman to a new height. After arriving on the God of War, Hallman finally understood what kind of status Hanjin had. There was no falsehood in the way he addressed Guevara. If Hanjin, as a lord, did so, who would dare to be disrespectful to Guevara? Moreover, Guevara's character was very admirable. Otherwise, a powerful figure like the Thunder Titan Domingo would not be so respectful to Guevara. Mr. Hallman, I have something to say to you for a long time. Hanjin stopped smiling and said solemnly, Thank you. Lord Raphael, you are too polite. Just as you said just now, based on my friendship with Guevara, these small things are not worth mentioning. Hallman's face was full of modesty, but he was a little proud of himself. His judgment was not wrong. He had long believed that Hanjin was not an ordinary person. However, Hallman did not expect Hanjin to develop to such a great extent. Otherwise, he would have increased his investment. It may be insignificant to you, but to me, it is very important. You must have something to tell me for coming all the way here, right? Hanjin's tone was very sincere. Hallman was about to speak, but he suddenly realized that the words he had thought of were not suitable anymore. This was because Hanjin had already compared Hallman to Guevara and even considered himself as a junior. Such a humble attitude was simply unthinkable for a lord of the underworld. Before coming here, Hallman had thought of all possibilities. However, the situation in front of him had caught him off guard, and he did not know what to say. The conditions that he originally wanted to raise were obviously incompatible with the current atmosphere. As an elder, how could he have the nerve to open his mouth and talk about such conditions with his juniors? Moreover, it was after this junior had expressed his sincere gratitude to him. That's right, Hanjin said that he wanted to do something for him. But the problem now was how to say it. If he asked for too little, he would not be satisfied. If he asked for too much, the mercenaries of isolated Cliff City would scold him to death, even without Han Jin saying anything. Wasn't this just asking for repayment? Holman had been immersed in the business world all his life, but he was helpless in front of Han Jin. Although the atmosphere seemed to be harmonious, both sides were not equal. Han Jin had formed an alliance with the elves and destroyed the orcs. He was in the limelight right now, so Holman was a little afraid and nervous. This had nothing to do with Holman's experience. A weak person would instinctively feel inferior in front of a powerful person. Holman had a strange thought in his mind. Am I really old? Seeing Holman standing there in a daze and not speaking for a long time, Han Jin could not help but ask curiously, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Holman smiled bitterly and shook his head. He only felt an indescribable exhaustion fill his entire body. In fact, Holman had wronged Han Jin in this matter. Although Han Jin was not a kind-hearted person, he would never bite the hand that fed him. Not to mention the fact that Han Jin was grateful for Holman's timely help. Just the fact that Guevara was sitting there was enough for Han Jin to give Holman face. Even if Holman's request was a little excessive, Han Jin would still accept it. Han Jin's words were all from the bottom of his heart. If he knew what Holman was thinking, he would not know whether to laugh or cry. Seeing that Holman was not very interested, Han Jin hesitated for a moment before saying, "Mr. Holman, I have an idea. What do you think?" Holman forced himself to be interested and said, "Go ahead, Mr. Holman." Han Jin carefully considered his words and said slowly, "In the past, there were constant wars in this area. Dismark, Zagund, Wild Willow City, and Depew City often attacked each other, which posed a threat to the business of the isolated Cliff City Chamber of Commerce. But now, I mean to open a trade route between isolated Cliff City and the Holy Crown City. On this route, we will set up military stations at intervals to protect the caravans from being harassed. Of course, in view of your continuous support to us, your Chamber of Commerce will own 1/3 of the ownership of this route. And I think this trade route can even lead to the Bite Man and Wild Willow City. I believe Gao Bin will not object." What? This news shocked Holman. It was as if a golden pie had fallen from the sky, and it had landed right on his head. From the previous moment of desperation to the present moment of surprise, Holman could not adapt to such a huge change. Before he could say anything, he choked on his own saliva and coughed violently. This time, even Guevara could not stand it anymore. He could not help but say, "Why are you becoming more and more useless as you age? Isn't it just a trade route? Why are you so excited?" Holman coughed until tears came out of his eyes. When he finally caught his breath, he waved his hand at Guevara and said, "You don't understand. In this chaotic era, the thing that merchants were most afraid of was not making a loss, but being robbed. The lords were too embarrassed to do anything in public, but there were many ways to deal with the Chamber of Commerce. For example, they could disguise their soldiers as bandits or kill a prisoner and throw him into the hotel where the Chamber of Commerce was staying. In the name of public security, they could accuse the Chamber of Commerce. When the power was in the hands of others, they would be the meat on the chopping block. There was no way to resist. Wouldn't the huge Morgan and Company be destroyed so easily? Han Jin's intention was to open a trade route in his name. The Chamber of Commerce in isolated Cliff City would be under Han Jin's protection. With this banner, he would not only be able to travel around the Holy Crown City and the Bite Man City, but he would also dare to go to Depew City and Cold Shadow City. He did not believe that anyone would dare to attack Han Jin's men. "I don't understand." Holman's words made Guevara laugh. All right, you understand. Then you two can discuss it. I who don't understand can go do what I need to do. You can't leave." Han Jin quickly reached out and stopped Guevara, who was about to leave. "You were the one who initiated this from the beginning. You must be here as a witness." Holman finally understood that he had misunderstood this young lord who always had a bright smile, and it was a very serious misunderstanding. Thinking about his attitude just now, his old face could not help but blush. Since when did he become so paranoid? It seems that ever since I became the president, I have never really trusted anyone. Holman sighed in his heart. These days, my condition has been very bad. I usually don't get sick in the winter, but when summer comes, I get hot and cold easily. This is really strange. I've already fallen sick twice this month. Yesterday, when I was writing, I was about to throw up. But for the sake of the full attendance award, I had to persevere. In the past, when I was writing, every once in a while, I would think about my future direction. But I can't do that for this book. 5,000 words a day and 500 RMB a month is like a whip constantly lashing behind me. Personally, I feel that if this goes on, I will die. At least, I can't stand it anymore. July 1st, I want to take a break. If I don't update on the first day, the whip will be meaningless. I'll take the opportunity to rest. Chapter 436. Hanjin had never given orders to things that he did not understand, because he knew that if a layman were to lead an expert, it would only slow down the development. Therefore, after proposing the proposal to establish a trade route, he began to leave everything to Guevara and Hallman. To be honest, he was very embarrassed. He had asked Guevara to reorganize the army of the Holy Crown City. He had also asked Guevara to reorganize the government affairs of the Holy Crown City. Now, he was preparing to establish a trade route, but he still asked Guevara. He was secretly worried that others would suspect that he was deliberately trying to tire Guevara out. However, among the people in the God of War, only Guevara could be considered as an all-rounder. He had rich experience in handling military and political affairs. If he did not entrust it to him, who else could he entrust it to? However, this was Zhou Yu beating Huang Gai. One was willing to be beaten, while the other was willing to be beaten. For a veteran with a glorious history like Guevara, he was not afraid of being tired. Instead, he was worried about being neglected and forgotten by the world. Although he was extremely busy every day, it made his life very fulfilling and enjoyable. Furthermore, watching a small and weak group slowly mature gave him a sense of satisfaction. That was enough. Hanjin's face was not ordinary. He just felt a little ashamed, but in the blink of an eye, he turned his attention to Major Domo Gale. Chipango was inexperienced and needed someone to guide him. If Qualtini was a veteran spy chief, then Major Domo Gale was a diamond-level spy chief. If he did not use such a resource properly, it would be a waste. However, Major Domo Gale was a little lazy. He would only do things in person when it was a big threat to everyone's safety. If he was asked to guide Chipango personally, it would be difficult. How could he persuade him? Some people once criticized Hanjin, saying that he was too lazy. Hanjin was wronged. Hanjin only knew how to make use of his advantages and avoid his disadvantages. No one was perfect. When it came to the same thing, if you knew that you were not as good as others, why should you blindly meddle? Moreover, the reason he was able to come this far was all because of the formidable Tao arts he possessed. If he had the time, he might as well use it to regulate his breathing and absorb more origin energy. Strength was his foundation. Furthermore, he had more important things to think about. This area had basically been integrated. Holy Crown City, Black Raven City, and more than half of the Bite Man region belonged to him. In the north, there were still Depew City and Cold Shadow City. Chasem of Cold Shadow City had always held the initiative, while Molly Shin of Depew City had been bitterly resisting Cold Shadow City's attacks. What kind of strategy should he use against these two cities? Urge both sides to stop fighting. If it were half a year ago, Chasem and Molly Shin would only regard Hanjin as a joke. But now, no one dared to ignore the power of the Holy Crown City, which was exactly what Molly Shin wanted. At the same time, Chasem also had to reorganize his deployment. Unless he was prepared for the large-scale attack of the Holy Crown City, he could only withdraw his claws and teeth. Or could he join forces with Depew City to attack Chasem and then annex Depew City, making himself the sole ruler of the entire area? However, Hanjin did not want to do this. After the decisive battle with the orcs, he clearly realized how profound the resources of the top races on the continent were. The Titan clan should not be any weaker than the Golden Blood clan. Although Chasem had shown a strong desire to attack, he was only a typical example. Dominique's performance had made him inclined to strive for an alliance with the Titan clan. If the invasion of the Abyssal race were to be fully launched, the Titan clan would definitely become the backbone of the continent's resistance. He did not want to do something like killing each other. Guevara and Hallman were having a lively discussion. The economic model of this world was still very primitive, but primitive did not mean low income and poor efficiency. The business of Isolated Cliff City was mainly based on magic crystals and all kinds of weapons and armors. To put it simply, they wanted to make money from the war. Although there was no possibility of war breaking out in the vicinity, there were still further places to develop. Moreover, Hallman had received news from somewhere that after Grand Duke Solomon of the Capital of Elements occupied Fado City, he was planning to divide his army into two groups. One group would pass through the forest, and the other would sail across the sea. An expedition to the northwest would definitely require an astronomical amount of magic crystals. In the blink of an eye, it was already dark. After a simple meal, Hallman took his leave. As a businessman, of course, he would not miss any opportunity to please Han Jin. During the meal, he praised Han Jin's frugality. In fact, the lifestyle of the people on the God of War was indeed simple. This was related to the environment. The God of War was a world of its own, but it definitely could not be compared to the real world. Many details were cumbersome, such as the most worthless water, which was gathered by the magician's magic. Also, the daily garbage could not be thrown down casually, so was carried down by the mountain warriors. In order to save too much trouble, they could only pursue a simple life. After dinner, the deck gradually became quiet. Han Jin finally found an opportunity. He walked up to Dominique and asked with a smile, "How is it? Are you feeling better?" "Almost. Your magic is really amazing," Dominique replied softly. The injury on her right arm was almost completely healed. With this arm, even if Han Jin was kicked out of his position as the Lord, he could still become a cardinal. "Don't work so hard in the future." "Huh?" Dominique laughed. "All right, you've been here for so long. Have you ever missed home?" "Home?" Dominique's eyes were a little blank. She then said word by word, "You have already considered Chase-Am as your next opponent?" "Well," Han Jin laughed dryly. Dominique was much smarter than he thought. He originally wanted to use the warm word home to trigger Dominique's nostalgia and memories, but his intentions were immediately grasped by her. "I just want to know more about the situation in Cold Shadow City. You want to know about the strength of the Titans, right?" Dominique smiled bitterly. "Master Raphael, are you asking me to betray my race?" "I definitely don't mean that." Han Jin also smiled bitterly. He had wanted to ask this question for a long time, but he was worried that Dominique would misunderstand, so he delayed it until today. In the end, he was still misunderstood. "I won't say it," Dominique replied softly. Han Jin felt a headache coming on. He unconsciously tapped the side of the ship with his finger. The atmosphere was very awkward. "Raphael," Dominique suddenly said. "What?" "One day, when you attack Cold Shadow City and Thunder Mountain, I will stand with my people and fight against you," Dominique said slowly. Her tone was very slow, but it was full of determination. "Idiot, even if you think that, you shouldn't say it out loud." Han Jin sighed. "We're friends, aren't we?" Dominique smiled. "If I told you earlier, I wouldn't feel guilty. What you want to do is your business. Most of the time, you're always sitting here alone, giving me a feeling that you don't fit in. It's as if you don't want to fully integrate into this group." Han Jin said softly, "I thought that was your personality, but now I know that I was wrong." "You." At this point, Han Jin couldn't continue. He didn't expect the topic to take such a sharp turn and enter a minefield. Dominique always gave people the impression that she was shy and reserved, but when it really touched her soft spot, her words would become very sharp. At this moment, Han Jin couldn't help but think of the scene when Dominique and the behemoth warriors were madly attacking each other. "Just say what you want to say." Dominique tilted her head and looked at Han Jin quietly. "You already knew that one day I would definitely go to war with Cold Shadow City and the Titan race, and you made your choice long ago." Han Jin paused. "So, you and we will become enemies sooner or later, right?" Dominique smiled sadly and turned her eyes away. "You fought so hard on the battlefield because you wanted to repay us, didn't you? After all, we saved your life." Han Jin said softly, "How about this you've done your best, and you've repaid us. When that day comes, you can return to your people and fight with us without any guilt. Then what do you want me to do? Attack my people with you? Dominique's voice trembled slightly. Raphael, do you think that's possible? At this time, Sassoon noticed that something was wrong with Dominique. He walked over and asked, Raphael, what's wrong? It's none of your business. Hanjin turned around and said loudly. Sassoon paused and slowly stepped back. Leger was stunned and asked quietly, What's wrong with Raphael? Why is his temper so bad? How would I know? Sassoon smiled bitterly. Have you ever thought that dying on the battlefield is also a kind of happiness? That way, you won't have to suffer for the future. Hanjin said word by word. It's my fault. Hanjin let out a long sigh. Only now did Hanjin fully understand that there was a reason for Dominique's reservedness, restraint, silence, and incompatibility. With the rapid expansion of the Holy Crown City's power, it was only a matter of time before they would clash with Cold Shadow City. This was very normal, as every powerful lord would constantly devour the surrounding territories in order to become stronger. Therefore, Dominique had long been aware that she and the powerhouses on the God of War would become enemies. Fighting bravely was only for the sake of repaying their kindness. After that, she would be able to let go of all her worries and attachments. Therefore, when Hanjin mentioned home, Dominique's reaction became so intense. She had been waiting for this day. Dominique sat there silently and finally said the words that had been suppressed in her heart. She felt very relaxed. This was good. Even if Hanjin immediately attacked her and eliminated her as a potential threat, she wouldn't regret it. Dominique, do you trust me? Hanjin turned his head and stared at Dominique seriously. Dominique was silent for a moment and then slowly said, I do. Then let me tell you, I will not harm the Titan race. If there is a day when we go to war with Cold Shadow City, my only enemy will be Che-Sam. Raphael, you don't know what kind of prestige Che-Sam has among the Titans, Dominique said helplessly. From the moment they started talking about the minefield, she had been calling Hanjin by his name. She had already thrown away all her scruples and didn't care about etiquette. I don't care what kind of prestige he has. Hanjin yelled. I just want to ask you, do you trust me? Dominique quietly looked at Hanjin. She understood that this man had lost his composure. Although she had deliberately isolated herself, others didn't. Everyone treated her as a friend and comrade. The feeling of being valued was warm and gentle. The reason Hanjin had lost his composure was, of course, because he didn't want to be enemies with her. I trust you. Dominique hesitated for a moment before finally giving a firm answer. That's good, Hanjin slowly said. Don't let your imagination run wild in the future. I will take care of these problems. However, for Dominique, this was a dead knot that couldn't be untied. She didn't want to excessively provoke Hanjin, so she could only remain silent. Hanjin slowly turned around and looked into the distance. This was as far as they could go. He originally wanted to learn more about the Titan race from Dominique, but Dominique had given him too many surprises and affected him. Originally, he was hesitating between peace and war, but now he had made up his mind. He would first maintain peace and then find a way to deal with Che-Sam alone. I'm going to the Night of Bliss to find Dwight Steele. There are some things I need to discuss. Hanjin's thoughts were a bit messy. He didn't need to explain to Dominique where he was going, not to mention that Dominique didn't even know who Dwight Steele was. He then repeated, Don't let your imagination run wild, understand? I know, Dominique softly replied. Major Domo Gale. Hanjin turned around and said, Please make a trip to Riptide's camp. There are some things I need your help with. If it was any other time, Major Domo Gale would definitely ask what he was going to do. If it wasn't too important, he would find a way to avoid it. However, he was different from Guevara. Guevara had fallen from the peak to the bottom, and after a few decades, he had regained the rhythm of his life. Major Domo Gale, on the other hand, had always been at the top of the pyramid. He was now semi-retired, so it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. However, Hanjin's expression was not looking good. Just as Major Domo Gale was hesitating and was about to ask questions, Hanjin had already disappeared from the side of the ship. He could only reluctantly stand up and shake his head. Dominique, what did Raphael talk to you about? Seeing that Hanjin had disappeared, Leger immediately went over. Nothing, Dominique said with a light smile. Nothing? Then I'm not sure. You can ask him. Leger looked at Dominique suspiciously. She must be doing this on purpose. Looking at Hanjin's expression, who would dare to ask him? Hallister's arrest by the church didn't seem to affect the business of the Elysian Knights. The place was bustling with people. However, the hidden influence was not obvious. After arriving at the Elysian Knights, Hanjin knew that it was Schumann who had temporarily taken over the place. In the morning, Schumann would be busy with his own work. From afternoon to midnight, he would stay at the Elysian Knights. It was somewhat ridiculous that the chief magistrate of the city had become the manager of an entertainment place. Another official businessman. Therefore, the Elysian Knights was the only high-end entertainment place in the Holy Crown City. The rest were all second- and third-rate places. In the past, some powerful nobles and wealthy businessmen didn't dare to challenge Dismark's authority. Now, they didn't dare to challenge Hanjin. Under Schumann's personal guidance, Hanjin quickly found Dwight Steele's room. Seeing Hanjin's figure, the noisy atmosphere suddenly calmed down. The mercenaries led by Dwight Steele all stood up and respectfully bowed to Hanjin. Don't be so polite. Sit. Hanjin smiled and waved his hand. However, he also knew that if he didn't sit, these mercenaries wouldn't sit either. He slowly walked over and sat in the main seat that had been reserved in advance. He looked around and asked, "Are there any other brothers?" From Dwight Steele's tone, it seemed that all the qualified mercenaries in isolated Cliff City had come. He thought that there would be hundreds of mercenaries, but now he only saw a dozen. He was a bit disappointed. Just us. Dwight Steele smiled. The others are all in the hotel. Why didn't you call them all over? Well, Dwight Steele was speechless. He had his own difficulties. Hanjin said that he would treat them, and then he called hundreds of mercenaries over. What was he trying to do? Was he trying to take advantage of the situation? Dwight Steele believed that he had a bright future ahead of him, so he wouldn't mess around with this kind of thing. He also didn't want to leave a bad impression on Hanjin. Therefore, he only called for the most qualified and powerful mercenaries. Hanjin's gaze fell on the table and found that Dwight Steele only ordered a few simple dishes. The wine on the table was also of the mid-range, and he only ordered 2 or 3 bottles. As for the maids, there wasn't even a single one. He immediately understood Dwight Steele's concern and smiled. What? Are you afraid that I can't afford to entertain you? No, sir. Dwight Steele smiled apologetically. We just arrived at the Holy Crown City. If we make too much of a fuss, it won't be good for your reputation. The other mercenaries nodded. Hanjin was a mercenary, so they naturally thought of themselves as his direct subordinates. They used to be a family, so if they made too much of a fuss, it would inevitably bring shame to Hanjin and the mercenary world. However, it was rare for these unruly mercenaries to have such awareness. Low profile? It's good to think like that. Hanjin smiled. Then he suddenly remembered something. By the way, Schumann, are there any more elven maids here? No. Didn't you tell us before you left? Schumann hurriedly replied. Sir Hallister already sent all the elven maids back to the prison camp. That's good. Hanjin said. He used to be worried that Hallister would fall into the trap of money and disobey his orders. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to explain it to Gao Bin. Sir, I heard that you want to release all the elven prisoners? A mercenary asked. Yes, that's too easy for them. The mercenary shouted. It was a coincidence. When Juventus was escorting the magic crystal cannons to the Holy Crown City, they were besieged by the elves. Fortunately, Hanjin appeared and saved them. The mercenary was also among them, so of course he held a grudge against the elves. I was really tired yesterday, so I wanted to relax a bit next month. However, the secretary talked to me and said that the monthly 500 full attendance bonus isn't important. What's important is that everyone wants to see the new chapters every day. If there's no new chapters, they'll be disappointed. The secretary's awareness is higher than mine. So, I'll continue to work hard and make sure to update every day. However, there will be some fluctuations in the word count. If I can write, I'll definitely write 5,000. If I can't, I'll just write 3,000. Chapter 4:37. Did you drink too much, kid? Dwight Steele scolded in exasperation. Han Jin looked around and asked softly, "Are there a lot of people who think this way?" A few of the mercenaries were about to speak, but Dwight Steele's sharp gaze immediately shut them up. The other mercenaries didn't know, but Dwight Steele was very clear about the relationship between Han Jin and Sunir. He was afraid that his subordinates would say something that would anger Han Jin. Han Jin felt a headache coming on as he watched Dwight Steele and the mercenaries exchange flirtatious glances. Naturally, he knew what these people were thinking, and he couldn't help but feel troubled. These men, who had been living their lives with their lives on the line, sometimes had very simple standards for judging good and bad. If you were good to them, as long as they felt that you were sincere, they would treat you as a brother. And if someone had bad intentions towards them, then it was very simple. The first thing they would do would be to draw their sword against them. Being a mercenary meant that they were destined to live in dangerous environments for a considerable amount of time. Dangerous primordial forests, ferocious magical beasts, and of course, betrayal from their companions was even scarier. In such harsh living conditions, a single betrayal was enough to kill them. They couldn't afford to be betrayed because it often meant death. It was precisely because of this that mercenaries rarely opened their hearts to anyone, and it was easy for them to be hostile towards others. The mercenaries in isolated Cliff City only knew that they were once besieged by the elves. As for what happened after the alliance, they didn't know, nor did they know about the elves' contribution in the battle against the Beastmen. This time, among the mercenaries who came with Dwight Steele, at least 3/4 of them were hostile towards the elves. Even Dwight Steele himself was somewhat against the alliance, but he didn't dare to show it. He knew that the consequences of offending Sunir might not be any better than offending Han Jin himself. "Brothers," Han Jin muttered to himself for a moment, then said, "I know you all have opinions about the elves, but what I want to say is that nothing is set in stone. A friend now might become an enemy in the future. Similarly, although the elves have attacked us before, that was only the decision of the Senate. It doesn't represent the majority of the elves, and it doesn't affect the sincerity of the elves in this alliance." Dwight Steele and the mercenaries didn't say anything and just listened. Also, perhaps everyone doesn't understand the current situation. Han Jin continued, "Although we have annihilated the orcs, this is just the beginning. There are still many more powerful enemies waiting for us. Under such circumstances, forming an alliance with the elves is no longer a means. It is something we must do. Only by uniting all the forces that can be united can we go further. Do you understand what I mean?" Dwight Steele nodded. To be able to stand out from so many mercenaries, he naturally wasn't stupid. Before Han Jin came to isolated Cliff City, Dwight Steele was already considered an important figure. The other mercenaries also understood the meaning of Han Jin's words, but they were more grateful. Han Jin didn't have to say these words to them. To the mercenaries of isolated Cliff City, Han Jin was like a legend. Even if Han Jin didn't explain anything, as long as he gave the order, these mercenaries would carry it out to the letter. What they didn't expect was that Han Jin would carefully analyze the meaning of forming an alliance with the elves. This made them all feel that they were valued greatly. "Since you all understand, then," Han Jin stood up and looked around, his eyes shining. "I don't want to see any of you get into a conflict with the elves. The elves are not our enemies, not now, and not in the future." All the mercenaries who were swept by Han Jin's gaze felt a chill in their hearts. Among them, there were a few arrogant fellows who were still thinking of doing something behind his back, but now they had completely given up on that idea. "Shuman, take away all these dishes and serve them to me according to the standard of a VIP." Han Jin continued, "Change the wine as well. Brothers, let me tell you something from the bottom of my heart. Don't be afraid to enjoy, and don't be afraid to leave the impression that you like to enjoy. You are more capable than others. You have sacrificed more than others, and you have endured more dangers than others. What's wrong with enjoying a little more? If I can't enjoy after doing so much, then there's no point in being a lord. I might as well go back to being a mercenary. Dwight Steele and the mercenaries roared with laughter, and the atmosphere suddenly became lively. What did they want from leaving isolated Cliff City to come here? Wasn't it to achieve success and change their social status? They didn't want to spend the rest of their lives as mercenaries. After leaving the Night of Bliss, Han Jin went straight back to the God of War. Compared to dealing with all the big and small matters, Han Jin preferred to sit there alone and experience the feeling of his origin energy increasing bit by bit. However, his current position didn't allow him to truly be a carefree manager. The next morning, as soon as Han Jin stepped onto the deck, he bumped into Dominique. This was inevitable because the Thunder Titan had nowhere else to go besides the deck. Both of them felt a little awkward, and neither of them spoke. They just nodded to each other as a greeting. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Han Jin wanted to leave, but that would be too obvious, and it wouldn't be good for him. Just as Han Jin and Dominique stood there awkwardly, neither of them knowing what to say, a figure hurriedly walked onto the deck and broke the deadlock. Both of them secretly let out a sigh of relief. The person who came was Chipango. He didn't know what had happened, but he looked a little nervous. After quickly walking to Han Jin's side, he first glanced at Dominique, then bowed and said hesitantly, "My lord, has it begun?" Han Jin asked softly. Chipango was stunned for a moment, then quickly nodded his head. In fact, he wanted to ask how Han Jin knew about this, but with Dominique beside him, he could only suppress his curiosity. "Sit for a while." Han Jin called out to Chipango. "Shumon should be here soon. By the way, have you eaten breakfast?" "Breakfast?" Chipango's expression suddenly became very strange. His lord was really different from the rest. After such a thing happened, he still had the time to care about whether he had eaten breakfast or not. Although it was a little unbelievable, Chipango was still a little touched. He respectfully replied, "I heard about this when I woke up, and then I rushed over directly. I really didn't have time to eat." Han Jin nodded and sat on a chair. "Then eat with us later." Not long after, the people on the God of War also came up one after another. The originally empty deck suddenly became lively. At the same time, the breakfast that had just been prepared was placed on the table. Chipango was sitting there and eating carefully. It was not easy to get on the God of War. Now, being able to freely enter and leave the God of War had become a symbol of status, let alone eating breakfast on it. Chipango naturally cherished this rare opportunity. He didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but he felt that the food on the God of War was really delicious. "Ha!" A big hand suddenly landed heavily on Chipango's shoulder. Chipango was so scared that he almost spat out the food in his mouth. As soon as the angry Chipango turned around, he saw Moxink's big, grinning face. "I say, why are you here to freeload again?" Morrison's didn't seem to see Chipango's angry expression. He sat down next to Chipango and took a drumstick from Chipango's plate. Chipango opened his mouth, but he couldn't say anything. It was impossible to talk to Morrison's. He was afraid that he would be the one to suffer in the end. Besides, this was the God of War. He didn't dare to be as careless as Morrison's. Chipango could only endure it. He sighed in his heart and lowered his head to eat the remaining drumstick on his plate. If he didn't hurry, Morrison's would come and snatch it from him after he finished eating. As the saying went, whatever one was afraid of would happen. Chipango was on the verge of breaking down. A hand appeared out of nowhere and snatched away his remaining drumstick at lightning speed. At the same time, a voice that sounded somewhat malicious rang in his ears. "Chipango, I noticed that your temper is especially good today. You're not angry at Morrison's for treating you like that. You won't be angry at me, right?" "Leger." Chipango gritted his teeth and said in a low voice. He forced himself not to go berserk as he slowly turned around. Being able to snatch something from under the nose of a thief could only mean one thing. The person who did it was also a thief. Although Leger wasn't the only thief on the God of War, with Majordomo Gale status, no matter how old he was, he wouldn't do such a thing. Sure enough, when Chipango turned around, he saw Leger eating a drumstick with relish while winking at him. However, although Chipango was angry, he didn't know how to deal with these two guys. Rushing up and attacking them was obviously not going to work. He knew that he didn't have the right to be presumptuous on the god of war. Attack them with words? It probably wouldn't have any effect at all. But Chipango was really unwilling to just let it go. Seeing that Chipango didn't respond, Morrisons and Leger didn't do anything excessive. The two of them quickly picked up their breakfast on the table and sat opposite Chipango. As they ate, they stared at Chipango without blinking, as if they were afraid that Chipango would rush over and snatch it. "You guys," Chipango really didn't know what to say. He shook his head and sat back down. His heart was very depressed. It seemed that breakfast on the god of war wasn't easy to eat. Chipango's low profile made Morrisons and Leger feel as if they had punched cotton. They immediately lost the mood to tease Chipango. The table immediately quieted down, and the few of them ate their breakfast in silence. One had to know that when they were in the forest, they would play together when they had nothing to do. Now that Chipango had gone out to do something, he had become more polite to them. He was more respectful, but less easygoing. Some things existed to be broken. The silence on the table didn't last for a minute before it ended with the arrival of Sasu. The first thing Sasu said when he sat down was, "Morrisons, I heard that you went to see Sylvia?" Morrison's face suddenly turned red. He said in a rough voice, "What does it have to do with you? Look at you. Don't be so agitated. I'm just concerned about you." Sasu had a very good temper. This was a common problem with these people. When they had the upper hand in a verbal argument, they would often become gentle and polite. "That's impossible," Leja suddenly blurted out. This time, even Morrisons was a little surprised. Usually, Leger would be the one to kick someone when they were down. Why was he suddenly so kind today? "It's true. This news is absolutely true," Sasu emphasized. This was such a good opportunity to attack Morrisons, and he couldn't let it be ruined. He definitely hasn't seen Sylvia yet. Leger didn't know why, but he didn't believe Sasu's words. "According to my analysis, he and Sylvia haven't met yet. Didn't you notice? Morrisons doesn't have any injuries on his body. If he really did meet her, he would probably be lying in bed, dying. Lady Sylvia's power. TSK, TSK. Morrison's eyebrows immediately rose. He stared at Leger with his eyes wide open. He knew this kid was up to no good. The few of them held back their laughter and looked at Morrisons. Sasu even asked mischievously, "Morrisons, tell me yourself. Have you seen her or not?" Morrisons was just about to say something, but he felt that something was wrong and immediately shut his mouth. If he said that he had seen her, these people would definitely ask about the process. If he said that he hadn't seen her, then it would indirectly confirm Leger's words. This was obviously a dilemma. So Morrisons had no choice but to follow Chipango's example. "I won't say anything. My lord, something's wrong." As Han Jin expected, Shumon, the chief sheriff, appeared on the deck. "What's wrong? Don't worry, sit down and talk." Han Jin sat down and pointed to the chair beside him, motioning for Shumon to sit down. Shumon's expression didn't look good. He first looked at Han Jin's expression, then carefully said, "Sir, your mansion has been surrounded by those believers." "What?" Before Han Jin could say anything, Guevara flew into a rage and slammed his palm on the table. Fortunately, the table was within the protection of the god of war, so it didn't collapse from Guevara's attack. Surrounded the mansion? Haha, what's the use? If they had surrounded the god of war, then maybe they would have scared me. Han Jin looked calm and didn't show any signs of anger. Guevara, who was in a rage, saw that Han Jin didn't seem to be faking it. He vaguely understood something, but he still wasn't sure, so he asked, "Raphael, you mean Han Jin's side? Sir, since it has already happened, then no matter whether these believers acted spontaneously or instigated by others, we can't take extreme measures. After all, believers are also the people of the Holy Crown City." But Han Jin changed the topic and said with a murderous look, "Pass down the order. If anyone dares to break into the Lord's mansion, kill them all." "Yes, sir." Shumon bowed and said, "There's one more thing. Those believers have made a request." "Request?" Guevara sneered, and the others on the god of war also had looks of disdain on their faces. Even the church was only able to survive because of Han Jin. How dare a few mere followers make demands of them? Tell me, what request did they make? Hanjin didn't have any extreme reaction, but asked lightly. Those believers want to open up all the parishes. Hanjin frowned. What a big appetite. All? Those idiots don't think that today's Holy Crown City was conquered by them, do they? Guevara's words were full of coldness. Hanjin had reached where he was today step by step, and Guevara had poured too much effort into it. He would never allow anyone to destroy it, no matter who that person was. Even if Jedis personally made this request, Guevara would refuse without hesitation. Even if Adolf, who was said to be more powerful than the Pope, was here, he believed that there wouldn't be a different result. Hanjin pondered for a while, and then said to Schumann, "Go back and keep an eye on them. Remember, don't do anything unless it's necessary. Just let them be outside for now." Schumann hurried back, and the rest of the people were looking at Hanjin, wondering why he still looked so calm when even his own mansion was surrounded. Noticing everyone's gaze, Hanjin smiled. "Why are you all looking at me like that? After all, believers are not mobs. I can't order them to be killed, can I? It's impossible to kill them all. We know that even if you don't say it." Guevara said worriedly, "But we can't just let them do whatever they want, right? Those people can't do much now. Just wait. I believe that sooner or later, someone will not be able to bear it." Hanjin said meaningfully. Guevara frowned and thought for a moment, then smiled and looked at Hanjin with appreciation. "Well, Raphael, you're right. Someone will not be able to bear the loneliness." At this time, Major Domo Gale also figured out the crux of the matter and looked at Hanjin in surprise. It was not surprising that old men like them who had experienced the vicissitudes of life could see the reason, but Hanjin was able to deal with it before them at his age. Other than Hanjin, Major Domo Gale had never seen a young man who could do this. Guevara was appreciative, Major Domo Gale was surprised, and Domini, who had been watching silently from the side, was shocked. The scene of the conversation between Chipango and Hanjin appeared in Domini's mind again. "Sir, it's begun?" Domini thought back to Chipango's cautious look, and she had a feeling that Hanjin had already known what was going to happen. But the question was, how did Hanjin know? Schumann would definitely have rushed over to report as soon as the believers surrounded the mansion. And then Domini suddenly remembered something that Hanjin said to Chipango. "I think Schumann will be here soon." Even knew about Schumann's arrival. Domini originally thought that he and Schumann had made an appointment in advance, but now it seemed that was not the case at all. All signs showed that Hanjin knew the movements of the believers like the back of his hand, which explained why Hanjin was so calm. Everything was within his calculations, and even, it seemed like Hanjin was commanding the believers. A chill spread from the bottom of Domini's heart. Chapter 438. In fact, when Hanjin led the army to attack the Bite Man, Adolf had already turned the entire Holy Crown City into a parish. However, he did not expand to other satellite cities. No matter how radical his attitude was, he should always have some discretion in his actions. After all, Adolf was an old man who had experienced many vicissitudes of life. It was difficult to find someone older than him in the human world. He could not be as unscrupulous as a young man. If he really expanded the parish completely, it would be tantamount to pushing Hanjin to a dead end. Either he would fight with his back to the river, or he would completely surrender. There was no other way. Moreover, the so-called Holy Crown City parish system was very incomplete. Under normal circumstances, the parish had a lot of power parallel to the secular authorities. As for who was above and who was below, it was never fixed. It was completely dependent on the level of power, attitude, strength, and so on of the two contenders. For example, in Jedi's former parish, Jedis had the right to speak. No matter if it was a lord personally appointed by Nicholas or a general with thousands of troops, they all had to kneel down in front of Jedis. In Iron Fist City, where Nicholas was personally in charge, another archbishop of the Holy See, Zachary, was personally appointed as the parish bishop. However, Zachary was completely suppressed by Nicholas. It was not that Zachary was incompetent. If it were Jedis, he would also not challenge Nicholas' authority. In the end, Zachary was so angry that he resigned as the parish bishop and proposed that the Iron Fist City Parish and Jedis Parish be merged into one, with Jedis still as the parish bishop. Thus, the largest, most significant, and most prosperous parish was born. This was also the beginning of the complete falling out between Jedis and Nicholas. It was impossible for there to be no conflicts between the two systems. It was just a matter of who gave in more and who gave in less. Jedis had the Pope above him, so he could not maintain his own opinions. He had to protect the Pope's authority and the interests of the Holy See. In Holy Crown City, the most important reason why Jedis could maintain his friendship with Hanjin was that Jedis had completely given up his previous ideas. He had never fought with Hanjin. If he wanted to re-establish the Holy See, he would go to Hanjin, and then Hanjin would give him a piece of land. If he did not have enough funds, he would go to Hanjin, and then Hanjin would give him a sum of money. For anyone with ambition, this was unbearable. Territory and funds were the two lifeblood of ambition. How could they tolerate being held in the hands of others? However, Jedis was willing to accept this. He would no longer fight for anything. As long as he accepted the existence of the Holy See and was free to spread the glory of God, he had nothing else to ask for. Hanjin said that the people had just settled down and there were still strong enemies outside that posed a threat. It was not the time to expand the parish quickly, as it could easily cause chaos. Fine, he would wait patiently. Hanjin said that theocracy and secular power were two different things. The territory of Holy Crown City could recognize the God of Light as the only true God, but the Holy See could not interfere with the secular power, especially not in the name of reducing taxes. Fine, he only cared about spreading the doctrine and did not care about anything else. In the eyes of some radical priests, Jedis was undoubtedly a shameful capitulator. Interestingly, among the Holy Knight and Cardinal bishops, Jedis had gained the support of the majority. Even the veteran Adonis stood on Jedis' side. They all knew that the Holy See could not withstand any more twists and turns. More priests, under the influence of rigid doctrines, education, and various historical factors, had been spoiled. They believed that human beings must believe in the God of Light, and they were the bearers of God's grace, so they should be looked up to by all human beings, including lords and emperors. They should also accept people's contributions to the Holy See. Hanjin had conquered the Holy Crown City and then handed it over to the Holy See, which was the obligation of the believers. If he wanted to occupy the Holy Crown City alone and exclude the Holy See, then Hanjin would be a blasphemer who must be eliminated. However, the Holy Crown City was different from the southwest region. The Holy See had not visited the city for a long time, which was equivalent to a desert of faith. Hanjin was so famous that many people speculated that his real strength had reached the level of demigod. Moreover, the Holy Crown City was conquered by him. Although the priests arbitrarily treated the whole city as a parish and acted without authorization, they did not recruit many believers. It was not until the priests shouted the slogan of tax reduction that the civilians responded. However, half of the civilians still maintained a wait-and-see attitude. Even if the priests wantonly praised Hanjin and belittled Hanjin, the civilians did not dare to make a decision easily. The Holy See was so powerful. How could it be driven to the Holy Crown City? Hanjin was so weak. How could he defeat the elders of Dragon City? That was a real demigod strongman. The gate of the newly built Lord's Mansion was already crowded with people. There was no gap on the road that could accommodate more than a dozen knights. However, the Knight Regiment of Faith of Amijor and the Knight Regiment of Shield of Freedom of Adonis were not involved. None of the Grand Cardinals were present, which meant that those who came here to make trouble belonged to the low-level priests and believers of the Holy See. It was not easy to establish a unified command. Hanjin was standing in front of the window, overlooking the crowd from afar. His face was always calm. "My lord, so Adolf already knows what we are doing?" Schumann frowned and asked softly, "Then why didn't he come out to stop us?" He can't know our specific plan. He just sensed it. Han Jin smiled. After all, our reaction was too artificial. But my lord, what do you want to say? Have you ever seen a circus? Yes, I have. In the circus, there are always some demon beasts that look very dangerous. In fact, the wildness of those demon beasts has long been worn away with the passage of time. Otherwise, how could they be whipped and teased by people? If they are released back into the forest of demon beasts, I guess they will not be able to survive in the forest. Han Jin said slowly, not only demon beasts, but also human beings will degenerate. Adolf is an ascetic. Do you know what an ascetic needs the most? What is it? Loneliness. Han Jin smiled. Only a long period of loneliness can make their souls purer, their faith firmer, and their strength stronger. A demon beast that has been lonely for decades suddenly returns to the herd. I guess he will be more or less uncomfortable, because this is not the life he wants. Schumann was silent, secretly thinking about Han Jin's words. Maybe that Adolf is really a wise man, but his wisdom is only in how to temper himself and how to perfect himself. It has nothing to do with human nature. Jed's is busy dealing with teaching affairs and dealing with all kinds of people. In this regard, he should be far better than Adolf. Also, Jed's knows me very well. Han Jin smiled. After Jed's realized that we might be involved, he could vaguely guess my intentions, but Adolf couldn't. So he hasn't done anything yet. Jed's guessed our intentions? Then he should have come out. My lord, look over there, Schumann shouted. While Schumann was in shock, Han Jin saw the figures in the distance. Jed's had come with Ami J. Adonis, Odd, and dozens of Light Knight. You really have a crow's mouth. Han Jin shook his head helplessly and took a few steps back. Close the window. It won't be good if they discover us. Schumann looked a little embarrassed. He hurried over and carefully closed the window, then asked, My lord, what is Jed's doing here? Is he ruining our plan? As the Pope, he can't remain silent. Han Jin sighed softly and said, He tried his best to do what he should do, and the rest is up to fate. Jed's made a sad decision. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. Han Jin said, Come in. The door opened, and Chipango walked in with a man in his 30s wearing a priest's robe. Han Jin looked at the priest's robe and couldn't help but frown. He then gave Schumann a look. Schumann asked, You weren't discovered? Why didn't you change your clothes? No, I've been very careful, Chipango hurriedly said. My lord, I also want to change my clothes, but there's not enough time. The priest said, My brothers are still waiting for me. Is everything ready? Schumann asked. Absolutely, my lord. The priest was very respectful in front of Schumann and didn't dare to raise his head. Schumann took out a letter from his pocket and handed it to the priest. Read it quickly and burn it after you're done. The clergyman took the letter and opened it in a flurry. He quickly read through it, then took out a flint and lit the candlestick beside him. He then placed the letter on the flame and really burned it. Okay, you can go now. Schumann waved his hand. Yes, my lord. The priest bowed. Although he felt that there was a fourth person sitting on top of him, he didn't dare to raise his head and quickly left the room. This kid is very obedient in front of you, Chipango said. That's because he doesn't know who you are. If he knew who you were, he would probably be too scared to walk. Schumann smiled. I'm the chief sheriff personally appointed by my lord. I'm in charge of people like him. Of course, he has to be obedient. He's very smart, Han Jin said softly. The priest didn't dare to raise his head. It was very likely that he had already guessed that the mysterious person who appeared was far more powerful than Schumann. He might even have guessed his identity. My lord, you mean to keep them? Schumann looked shocked. But we'll leave too many traces. No, you don't have to take care of him. Let's see what he's capable of. Han Jin said slowly. If he can survive this chaos, this person will be yours. I know that Chipango isn't the only one who needs people. You need people too. TSK. Schumann sighed. He's just a little ruffian. God knows what kind of luck he has to be able to gain your appreciation. His background isn't important, Han Jin said. Yes. Chipango nodded heavily. My lord's previous title was lower than yours. What does that mean? Yes. Schumann laughed. You don't have a title yet. You're just a commoner. Don't I have to listen to you? Schumann was very good at dealing with people. He knew that he had accidentally said something wrong and immediately tried to fix it. Ha! Schumann's words made Chipango feel very comfortable. Naturally, he couldn't continue and laughed it off. The atmosphere fell into silence. Schumann rolled his eyes and changed the topic. It's a pity that the Lord's mansion was just built. My lord, you haven't lived in it yet, right? After this mess, there shouldn't be much left. Can be that big? Destroy the Lord's mansion? Chipango asked in surprise. He and Schumann were only in charge of their own parts and reported to Han Jin at the same time. He didn't know much about Schumann's actions. Of course. Do you know how many people they have? 700 to 800. Schumann smiled. So many? It's not that bad. I've already thrown some extremely vicious and merciless fellows into prison. Schumann said, I used to deal with them a lot. You see, my lord trusted me and let me be the sheriff. I can't disgrace him, can I? I can't afford to offend those powerful professionals, but I can deal with those hooligans who have nothing to do. Those guys all listen to you? Han Jin asked. Yes, but they don't know that I'm the one behind this. Schumann said, the whole city knows about my relationship with you. If I expose you, you won't be able to explain it. I'm curious. Those guys you mentioned have all become priests? Chipango shook his head. They also need to make a living. Schumann said, they used to live in the corners of the Holy Crown City and made a living by swindling people. I can't disgrace you, my lord, so of course I have to keep a close eye on them. They don't dare to do anything against the law and order. They don't have any ancestral property and don't want to work. What can they do? The question is, why did the Vatican accept them? After Adolf came to the Vatican, he recruited believers everywhere. The Vatican is eager to expand its power. Why would they care about the quality of their believers? Schumann laughed. For those hooligans, they can at least make a living after joining the church, right? Han Jin was a bit lost in thought. This kind of thing seemed to have happened in the history of another world. The Vatican is messing around like this. Sooner or later, something will happen. Chipango sneered. Even without us, they will suffer. At this moment, there was a rhythmic knock on the door. Chipango hurriedly said, Mr. Winston is here. Han Jin nodded and motioned Chipango to open the door. Winston was dressed in casual clothes. He hurriedly walked a few steps and bowed to Han Jin. My lord, I'm ready. Do you have any other orders? Pay attention to your own safety. Don't act rashly. Han Jin said, You know, this time I need you to lose. I understand. My lord, how many people did you bring? Han Jin asked. About 100. Winston replied, They are all soldiers selected from the 1st and 2nd Swordsman regiments. Their strength is very ordinary. They were only responsible for transporting supplies and almost never had the chance to go to the battlefield. Han Jin nodded after a moment and said, You can go. Yes, my lord. Winston bowed again, then looked up at Chipango and Schumann with a smile and quickly walked out. As soon as Winston left, there was a sudden commotion outside. Chipango curiously walked to the window and looked outside, then said, My lord, I'll go out and see what's going on. Okay, Han Jin said. My lord, it seems that Jedis and the priests are arguing. Schumann turned around and said, Jedis? Han Jin was stunned. He also walked to the window and looked into the distance. After a while, Chipango hurried back. Sure enough, Jedis and the priests were arguing. Han Jin went to fight the Bite Man and took almost all the military forces with him, leaving a vacuum in the Holy Crown City. For the church, which had many things to do, this was undoubtedly an excellent opportunity to expand their power. If Jedis was in charge, he would have to consider Han Jin's feelings. In the end, there would only be 2 results. One was to do things step by step and not provoke Han Jin, and the other was to do nothing and wait for Han Jin to come back. But it was different for Adolf. For a believer who had been immersed in his faith for nearly 100 years, it was an unbearable pain for him to suddenly walk on the edge of life and death. He wanted to restore the church's prestige at all costs, and he was already very old and his time was limited. He could not wait for the church to gradually recover its strength, so he used the most drastic method. First, he arrested Hal Lister to show his toughness. Then he quickly expanded the parish to establish the established fact. If it were not for Han Jin's fame and the firm opposition of Jedis and Adonis, he would have already expanded the parish to all the satellite cities of the Holy Crown City. No one knew whether Adolf realized that his unscrupulous recruitment of believers had left a hidden danger for the future of the church. Perhaps he had no other choice. But today, the hidden danger suddenly erupted. In the past, Jedis had a very high binding power over the church. The three holy knights, the Knight Order of Light, the cardinals, and all the bishops and priests would unconditionally obey Jedis' orders. Unfortunately, most of the priests and believers gathered in front of the Lord's mansion were new, and hundreds of priests with ulterior motives were inciting them. Jedis' influence had been reduced to the minimum. He blocked the entrance of the Lord's mansion and shouted for a long time, but still could not disperse the crowd. Moreover, there was a secret information that was circulating among the priests. Lord Raphael had led his army to annihilate the orcs. The army had suffered heavy losses, and Raphael himself was also seriously injured. If they wanted to do something, they had to do it now. If they waited for Raphael to recover, and if they waited for the army of the Holy Crown City to recover, it would be too late. In fact, many of the priests did not know what benefits they could gain by coming here to make trouble. Anyway, since everyone was here, they followed. Because they had not been in the church for long, they did not know Jedis' prestige and ability. Anyway, since everyone was making trouble, they followed suit. Chapter 439. We don't want to listen to your preaching. Brothers, it's useless to talk nonsense with them. Let Raphael come out. Let Raphael come out. In fact, the word brothers had fully exposed the identity of the person who was shouting. Yes, let Raphael come out. Open the parish. We want to open all the parishes. Jeds quietly scanned the crowd. He had already said a lot, but it didn't have any good effect. The priests were becoming more and more agitated, and he could even hear all kinds of curses. It was impossible to calm down a hot-headed crowd. The best way was to become a fanatic himself and blend into the crowd, secretly influencing others and changing their focus. With Jed's ability, he could totally handle this situation, but he didn't want to change anything because he had already seen through it. He had decided to dedicate his life to faith because of the ideals that he had always firmly held in his heart. People shouldn't always hate, deceive, or even harm each other. No matter how long the night was, there would always be a day when the sun would shine. This chaotic and cursed era had to end, but could it be achieved by these believers who lacked basic rationality? Absolutely impossible. Amy J. and Adonis' eyes were more or less hazy. Seeing Jed's being unscrupulously berated and even insulted, not to mention the cardinals who were angry, even Odor's face was not looking good. Who did they think they were? The atmosphere gradually worsened. At first, it was still Raphael coming out, but now it was a certain someone coming out. Of course, it was because Han Jin didn't respond, which made the gathered priests more and more confident. Amy J. even clenched the knight's lance in his hand, but he was just venting his anger. Even if Jeds gave the order to attack, he couldn't stab the knight's lance into the priest's bodies. The Holy See had always had supreme influence, and there had never been a case of believers killing each other. Not everyone had the courage to challenge the limits, and it had nothing to do with whether there was a good reason or not. I declare, Jeds raised his magic staff, and his voice resounded above the Lord's mansion with the help of magic. From now on, I am no longer the Pope. My Lord. Amy J. was stunned. Adonis' body also trembled, and he stared blankly at Jeds. The noise of the priests suddenly disappeared. They had gathered here to show their justice and force Raphael to open all the parishes. Who knew that Raphael would never appear, and their pope would be forced to resign? The consequences were too serious. After a long time, a scream suddenly cut through the air. Are you trying to scare us? We just want Raphael to open the parish. Who are you to stop us? Get out. You're just Raphael's dog. One of the priests jumped up and started cursing. A few minutes ago, he didn't even dare to breathe loudly beside Schumann. Now, he was actually cursing Pope Jed's, whose status was far higher than Schumann's. He was truly brave and pious. Dog, dog. The priest let out a chaotic roar. Jed's resignation not only did not stop the intense emotions of the priests, but also made the atmosphere completely boil. Jed's expression was as usual. He turned his horse and galloped to the other end of the long street. Amy, Jay, and Adonis ignored the priests and hurriedly followed behind Jed's. However, no matter how they called out to Jed's never looked back. In the end, he simply floated up and flew into the air, leaving the few paladins and cardinals looking at each other. The god of war was not affected at all, and everyone's life was still the same as before. Morrison's was walking in circles on the deck. He had made an appointment with Sylvia yesterday, and he was going to visit her today, but he did not want to go now. While he was hesitating, he suddenly saw a figure floating on the deck. Morrison shouted, "Jed's, why are you here? I heard that the people of the Vatican are causing trouble in front of the Lord's mansion. Is that right?" Jed's did not answer, but asked softly, "Where's Raphael?" "He went out a long time ago," Yelena said. As expected, Jed sighed softly and sat next to Guevara. He reached out his hand, grabbed the wine cup from Guevara's hand, and drank it in one gulp. "I thought you didn't drink?" Guevara asked in surprise. "As the Pope, it's a bad influence on you," Major Domo Gale laughed. "I'm no longer the Pope," Jed said faintly. After he finished speaking, he picked up the wine jug, but found that the wine in the jug was almost finished by Guevara and Major Domo Gale. He could not help but look around. Miriam had always been very clever. Seeing this, she hurried over and took the wine jug from Jed's hand, then hurried down to pour wine for Jed's. "What's going on?" Guevara asked in a deep voice. Everyone could see that Jed's expression was very abnormal. Below the ship, Jedis had concealed himself very well. However, on the god of war, he was always relaxed and did not want to hide too much. The unscrupulous insults just now had already pierced his heart. This was because some of the priests had escaped from the unsetting sun mountains. The reason he could cooperate with Hanjin was not to rely on anyone or to preserve the strength of the Vatican, but because Hanjin had many advantages and was a rare collaborator. He could fulfill his dreams together with Hanjin. Compared to Nicholas and most of the other lords, Hanjin had an extremely rare advantage. He was open-minded, not domineering, and not greedy for power. He could listen to the opinions of others. It could also be said that the cooperation between the Vatican and Hanjin was the safest and most simple, without too many intricate contradictions. As for the matter of opening up all the parishes, it was absolutely impossible for any other lord to do so. This was simply usurping all the achievements that others had fought for with their lives. No one could accept this. Being slandered as a lackey made him very uncomfortable. He had already explained it very clearly, but no one listened. You are a believer, and you can sacrifice everything for God and the Vatican. This is your dream, your choice. But because you have sacrificed, you think that you are standing on the highest point of morality. Then, you ask everyone to sacrifice like you. This in itself is a kind of evil. Violence wasn't scary, because everyone knew that violence wasn't good, no matter what kind of halo was applied to it. Moral harm, on the other hand, was something that people couldn't voice out. They could only go with the flow and use the same methods to harm others. In front of the Lord's mansion, just as the emotions of the priests were getting more and more crazy, Winston, who was fully clad in armor, walked out with more than 100 soldiers. They lined up in several rows and blocked the door of the Lord's mansion. The Lord's mansion had not yet been fully built, so there were almost no guards. The few gatekeepers had also escaped after the priests gathered. The priests were used to facing the empty door, so when they suddenly saw a group of soldiers walk out, they could not help but feel afraid. This was especially true for the priests in front of the line, who squeezed into the crowd. It was the priest who had first insulted Jed's again. He walked out of the crowd and slowly walked towards the soldiers with a firm pace. "What are you doing? What do you think you're doing?" The priest roared hysterically, pounding his chest. "Come on, Draw your swords. Come here. The soldiers shrank back because Winston had issued an order. No matter who or what the situation was, if they dared to hurt any priest, they would be punished severely by the military law. To put it bluntly, even if the priest started to attack them, they could only endure and never resist. The priest suddenly stretched out his hand and pushed a soldier's chest. Then, he kicked the soldier's lower abdomen. The soldier was only wearing leather armor. His face turned pale from the kick, and his body bent into a ball. Seeing this scene, the priests were all stunned. Brave warrior. He was really a brave warrior. The other soldiers just helped their companions up and did not say anything in return. Instead, they shrank back a few steps. Brothers, do you see it? They're just a group of paper tigers. The priest paused inexplicably and then shouted a new word. The priest had seen clearly that the soldiers of the Holy Crown City were so cowardly in appearance. What was there to be afraid of? The priests who had been hiding in the crowd felt ashamed and then angry. They struggled to squeeze out of the crowd. But at this time, they were not the only ones who wanted to show off. The crowd rushed forward little by little. Brothers, let's drag Raphael out and make him give us an explanation. The clergyman who had the most momentum raised his arms and shouted. He then rushed forward like a madman. The soldiers formed a line and tried to stop him, but the clergyman was unstoppable and his methods were unscrupulous. He punched, kicked, even pulled hair and tore off ears. He did everything he could to beat 7 or 8 soldiers back. Seeing this, the priests became more and more courageous. Moreover, they knew that the gathering in front of the Lord's mansion was just a symbol. Now the Lord's mansion had not been completed, so Lord Raphael was definitely not there. Of course, if Raphael was really there, regardless of whether he was seriously injured like the rumors said, they would not dare to act rashly. Attacking the empty Lord's mansion and attacking Lord Raphael were two completely different things. In the next moment, the clergy surged forward like a tidal wave, and the defensive line formed by more than 100 soldiers collapsed in an instant. The fully armed and majestic Winston was the first to desert, and the soldiers who were already panicking also scattered. There were a dozen soldiers who couldn't escape in time, and they were either surrounded by the crowd or knocked down by the clergy. Then, one foot after another stepped on them without hesitation. The crowd was too dense, and the clergy couldn't see what was beneath their feet, so there was nothing to be concerned about. When Hanjin returned to the god of war, he saw a strange scene. Jedis was sitting in the middle and talking. Morrison's, Sesu, and the other young people were all around Jedis, listening to him attentively. Guevara and Majordomo Gale were pushed outside. The two of them smiled bitterly and looked at each other. What's going on? Hanjin heard a few words from Jedis. It seemed like he was talking about life. Jedis' alcohol tolerance is really, Guevara said helplessly. Too bad. Majordomo Gale sighed. He drank too much? Too much. This time, Guevara and Majordomo Gale replied in unison. Raphael, you're back? Jedis also saw Hanjin. He laughed and said, Did everything go well? Hanjin never thought that Jedis' laughter would become so hearty and excited. He couldn't help but look at Jedis seriously. In the past, Jedis was reserved and gentle, but now he was full of energy. It was as if he was a completely different person. Go on, Morrison shouted, scratching his ears and cheeks. It seemed that Jedis was talking about something important. Light and darkness can coexist. Even if a person stands at noon, when the sun is at its brightest, there will still be an inconspicuous shadow under his feet. Jedis laughed and said, In fact, your lord, Sir Raphael, is an excellent example. Come, Raphael, tell them what you did just now. Morrison's, Yelena, Lorraine, and the others all turned to look at Hanjin. Hanjin immediately felt his head swell. He looked at Guevara, who shrugged helplessly. There's nothing to hide. Everything you did was for everyone's good, right? Jedis laughed. Raphael, say it. Sasu said anxiously. Look at you, what did you do? You always don't let us know. If this goes on, he wanted to say that if this went on, they would never mature and could only be taken care of. Ahem. Hanjin laughed dryly. Jedis, You drank too much. Should we find a place to rest? No. I'm in a very good mood. It can even be said that I've never been so good. Jedis shook his head and said, Moreover, my mind is very clear. The restrictions that used to be everywhere seem to have disappeared all of a sudden. Come, let's talk. Let's talk openly. My lord, it's not good. At this moment, a cry came from afar. Then, Schumann climbed up the stairs and shouted, It's not good, it's not good. My lord, those priests are completely out of control and forced their way into the Lord's mansion. They are smashing things everywhere and even set fire to the main building that hasn't been built yet. Look, Schumann pointed at the Holy Crown city behind him. Everyone gathered around. From here, they could clearly see thick smoke rising from the center of the city and rising into the sky. How dare they? Morrison's roared. They not only burned down the Lord's mansion, but also scattered Winston's soldiers. Schumann showed a sad expression. Lord Winston saw that the situation was not good and escaped in time, but a dozen soldiers were surrounded by the crazy priests, I think. Ha ha! Jedis laughed loudly. Raphael, it seems that your plan is going well. So what do you want to do next? I'm very curious. Don't worry about me. I'm no longer the Pope. No matter what you want to do, it has nothing to do with me. Han Jin wanted to rush up and knock Jedis out, but if he failed, would Jedis, who was in a state of madness, fight with him? With Jedis' current excitement, his combat strength should have increased greatly, which would not be easy to deal with. Morrison's and the others were stunned. What did Jedis mean? The priests causing trouble. Was this Han Jin's plan? Even Lorraine and Leslie stared at Han Jin blankly. After all, they had always regarded Han Jin as a sacred and powerful young hero in their hearts. The sadness on Schumann's face became stiff. He should have continued, or even complained about the atrocities of the priests in tears. How could he say it now? Raphael, what's wrong with you? Jedis shook his head. Why can't I say it? In fact, I think you're doing the right thing. Really, I can swear that I'm telling the truth. Han Jin glanced at Guevara and Major Domo Gale from the corner of his eyes. He was asking Guevara and the others if they should find a way to take Jedis down and then send him to rest. If they let him speak freely here, it would be very bad for them. You don't have to be surprised. That's the truth, huh? Under the glamour, there is always too much cruelty, despicableness, and shamelessness. Raphael, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about our current world. Seeing that Han Jin remained silent, Jedis shifted his attention to the others. Do you understand? If you want to understand this world, you can't just use your ears and eyes. You have to use your heart to feel and your brain to think. Everyone was still looking at Han Jin, and Han Jin couldn't defend himself. With Jedis' current state, if he denied it, Jedis would definitely throw out something even more serious to refute him. Let's go. I'll send you to rest. Han Jin walked to Jedis' side and held his arm. You haven't told me what you're going to do next. Jedis laughed. You're not going to completely destroy the Vatican, are you? I believe you're not that short-sighted. I just want to send you to rest. Han Jin smiled bitterly. Let's go, I'm begging you, okay? You're begging me? Jedis couldn't help but be stunned. Although he had lost control, he still had some ability to think. Yes, I'm begging you. Jedis, you've really drunk too much. Major Domo Gale quietly leaned over and grabbed Jedis' other arm. Let's go. Go to sleep first. When you wake up, we'll talk with you. Sigh. The truth is always annoying. Jedis was still as energetic as ever, but he stood up unsteadily. If it weren't for Han Jin and Major Domo Gale supporting him, he wouldn't even have been able to stand up. Han Jin winked at Major Domo Gale and quickly helped Jedis up the stairs. He even dragged Jedis along. Chapter 440. After much effort, Han Jin and Major Domo Gale finally settled Jedis down. After Jedis gradually fell asleep, Han Jin and Major Domo Gale returned to the deck and exchanged bitter smiles with Guevara and the other two. How much did he drink? Han Jin asked. Guevara made a gesture of downing the glass in one gulp and then raised 2 fingers. 2 glasses. Han Jin stared at the wine glasses left behind by Jedis and sweated. Most of the alcohol here didn't have high alcohol content, and those 2 glasses probably didn't even compare to half a bottle of beer. Yet, it was enough to make the Pope lose his composure in front of everyone. Hanjin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Not to mention the men on the God of War. Even Yelena, Lorraine, and Miriam could drink a few glasses. I didn't expect Jeds to be so bad when drunk. He doesn't have any self-control at all. Major Domo Gale smiled bitterly and said, "We can't let him drink in the future." Hanjin and Guevara nodded repeatedly. It would be a lie to say that they weren't afraid. Facing an out-of-control Jeds, they couldn't control him, nor could they hit him. It was too much of a headache. "Uncle Gale, did Sir Jeds lie just now?" A clear voice sounded. "This." Major Domo Gale was stunned and looked towards the direction of the voice. Lorraine was staring at him with a pair of big bright eyes. "Since he didn't lie, how can you criticize his character?" Lorraine's clear voice sounded again. "You should apologize to him." Major Domo Gale was dumbfounded. This is too absurd. Is she rebelling? He and Spencer were old friends. It could be said that he watched Lorraine grow up. How could she be so rude to an elder? "Lorraine, what's wrong?" Leslie was anxious and reached out to pull Lorraine. Everyone's eyes were focused on Lorraine, including Hanjin and Guevara. Yelena also walked to Lorraine and asked in surprise. Lorraine, under the pressure of everyone's gazes, Lorraine was slightly panicked and shy. She lowered her head and avoided Major Domo Gale's bright gaze. "Lorraine, are you drunk too?" Hanjin laughed dryly and said, "Leslie, you send Lorraine downstairs. Remember to rest well." He couldn't just watch everyone freeze here. Major Domo Gale was suddenly refuted. He couldn't vent his anger on Lorraine, but he also couldn't really admit his mistake. He could only wait for others to give him a way out. "Yes, yes." Leslie nodded her head like a chick pecking at rice. She then stuck out her tongue and said with a smile, "Uncle Gale, I'm sorry." After saying that, she forcefully pulled Lorraine up and quickly walked down the stairs. At first, Lorraine was a little resistant, but she also understood that she was too rash just now. Being dragged away by Leslie was the best way to resolve the awkwardness. She simply stopped resisting and let Leslie drag her down the stairs. "Don't be angry." Hanjin smiled and said, "Let's go have a few drinks." "Don't worry, I can hold my liquor much better than Jedis." "Let's go, Uncle Gale." Yelena greeted with a smile and affectionately held Major Domo Gale's arm. Major Domo Gale let out a long sigh. In fact, he wouldn't lower himself to the level of a young person. As an elder, he still had this much tolerance. Even if he was really angry, he would rather find trouble with Spencer than with Lorraine. However, he still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. What was going on? Because he had never been married, he treated his friends' children as his own. Not only were Jared, Edison, and Yelena taken care of by Major Domo Gale, but Leslie, Lorraine, and the others were also taken care of by him. Why did they suddenly become estranged from him? Hanjin, Major Domo Gale, Hanjin, Guevara, and Yelena were sitting at the same table. The young people tried their best not to attract attention and dispersed. Although Morrison's and the others dared to joke with Hanjin and even criticize him, they were always honest in front of Guevara and Major Domo Gale. At the moment, they all knew that Major Domo Gale was in a bad mood, so of course, they wouldn't go up and provoke him. Yelena personally poured wine for the 3 of them. Major Domo Gale drank a few glasses, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. Suddenly, his mind flashed, and he realized something. He couldn't help but feel a sense of fear in his heart. When he looked up, he saw that Hanjin and Guevara were constantly exchanging glances with each other. "What are you doing?" Major Domo Gale frowned. "Tell me, what do you think is Jed's greatest strength?" Hanjin laughed. "He is righteous and straightforward. I can't compare to him." "Raphael, you can't either." Guevara sighed. "And you, Lord Dark Left Hand, you can't compare to him either." "Yes, he is an idealist. He firmly believes that darkness will be expelled. He believes that people will stop killing each other and usher in peace. His beliefs give him a kind of compassionate and gentle charm that can infect people unknowingly. Not to mention others, even I like him very much." Hanjin said, and he is just over 30 years old. Although he is not very old, his experience is rich enough. Maturity, vicissitudes. This is a fatal temptation. Raphael, what are you trying to say? Major Domo Gale asked. The fear in his heart was getting stronger and stronger. He originally thought that it was just his own illusion, but after listening to Han Jin's words, the two of them seemed to have the same point of view. I see Sunir's shadow in her, Guevara said faintly. Guevara said lightly. When I mocked you, Sunir's reaction was just as fierce. You think so too? Major Domo Gale was stunned for a moment, then suddenly jumped up. No, absolutely not. But, Guevara murmured. Guevara, Jed is the Pope. Don't you know what that means? Major Domo Gale took a deep breath. I have to talk to Lorraine. Lorraine, Jed's? Yelena finally understood and opened her mouth in surprise. Oh my God, when did this happen? It didn't happen at all. Han Jin shook his head. Lorraine just has a good impression of Jed's. When she stood up just now, she also regretted it. Didn't you see her expression? Raphael has a point. We're just guessing. Gale, are you going to talk to Lorraine? Have you thought about what to say to her? Guevara asked. Children at this age have a very strong, rebellious mentality. If you don't say anything, maybe things will slowly fade away. If you say something, it might even add fuel to the fire, Han Jin continued. Child. Yelena was angry and amused at the same time. She pouted and said, How old do you think you are? At this moment, Schumann came over with a hesitant face and whispered, Sir, according to the plan, he was supposed to continue to criticize the atrocities of the priests. Then Han Jin would be furious, and everything would happen. But now that things had escalated to this point, was there any need for him to continue acting? Go back first. Send more people to keep an eye on them, and keep an eye out for any movements over there, Han Jin said slowly. Understood, sir. Schumann bowed and walked toward the stairs with his tail between his legs. Jedis had already exposed their plan, which was undoubtedly a slap to his face. He felt as if he had been stabbed in the back, and of course, he wouldn't feel good about it. Schumann came over to interrupt their conversation. Major Domo Gale had a little buffer time and gradually calmed down. Han Jin and Guevara had a point. The truth was still uncertain. If he hurried to Lorraine and told her not to do anything, it would be somewhat funny and would not be a good influence on Lorraine. It was better to wait for a while. Plus, with him here, nothing would happen. Han Jin also didn't mention how to suppress the believers. In this kind of internal conflict, he had to maintain a glorious image and let everyone believe that he was righteous. But after being disturbed by Jed's, he really couldn't say anything. He should at least talk to Jed's after he woke up and then make a decision. After a while, the uneasy Major Domo Gale excused himself and left, leaving only the three of them at the table. Yelena suddenly whispered in Han Jin's ear, Oh right, I forgot to tell you. Blanche left. Blanche left? Where did she go? Han Jin was stunned. I don't know, I think she went to find that paladin knight. Yelena was a little uncertain. Han Jin pondered for a moment. They haven't seen each other for a long time. Don't disturb them and give them more freedom. Yelena couldn't help but glance at the Holy Crown City. The billowing smoke column was still very thick. Obviously, the fire had not been extinguished. She asked worriedly, Will something happen? The city is so chaotic now. No, as a paladin knight, he can't even protect his own wife. Han Jin said. Oh, Yelena rolled her eyes and whispered, Where is Sister Sunir? Where did she go? She didn't come back for the whole night. You didn't quarrel, did you? Guevara coughed, stood up, and walked to the side of the ship. Yelena's face suddenly blushed. She knew that Guevara was forced to leave because she and Han Jin looked too intimate. No, do you think we are children who quarrel? Han Jin smiled. It must be Sisu and Jay, those two big mouths who told Sunir my plan. What plan? Yelena asked in surprise. Those who attack Chi Li are very bold. They won't give up easily. Han Jin said slowly, When I left yesterday, I asked Chipango to spread news that Chi Li was hiding in the barracks to recuperate. Sunir was worried about Chi Li's safety, so she stayed to take care of Chi Li. Speaking of this, Han Jin felt warm. Sunir was like this in the past. She would say what she did, or she wouldn't say what she did. If it wasn't for Sunir's help, he would never be where he was today. Then can I go find Sister Sunir? Yelena whispered. I can help you too. You think too highly of them. Han Jin laughed. Let an elf with God's mark and a magus help. But I have nothing to do. I'm bored. When I left this morning, you were already meditating in the magic lab. You're working so hard. Can you really be bored? Han Jin laughed. Okay, Yelena, I know you want to help me, but for this matter, Sunir alone is enough. Didn't you notice? Gao Bin has also disappeared. Yeah. Yelena looked around. She hadn't seen Gao Bin for a day. If Gao Bin and Sunir were together, even if they were attacked unexpectedly, they should be able to hold on until Han Jin came to help. At this time, Morrison's and the others came over. At first, they moved very slowly, but when they were almost there, Morrison's and Leger suddenly sped up and grabbed their own seats. Sasua's movements were a beat slower. When he reacted, Morrison's and Leger were already sitting there. Your energy is too exuberant. Han Jin shook his head. What's the point of fighting over 2 chairs? But on second thought, these 3 boys had almost nothing to do except for training. They could only play in boredom, so he couldn't blame them. Raphael, let me ask you something, Morrison said with a smile. Go ahead. What Jet said, is it true? At first, when they heard that the priests had besieged the Lord's mansion, they were particularly angry. But in the blink of an eye, they were exposed by Jed's. It turned out that everything was Han Jin's trap. The strong contrast made them feel disheartened, but they still believed in Han Jin in their hearts, so they wanted to get an explanation from Han Jin. You mean those priests? Han Jin smiled. Yes. Han Jin was silent for a moment, then said, It's true. Morrison sighed and scratched his head, then said, But, Raphael, if you want to teach them a lesson, just do it. Why bother? It's too complicated. I can't explain it in a sentence or two. Han Jin paused, then said, For example, if I want to hit you now, will you accept it? Why do you want to hit me? Morrison stared. Although he didn't answer directly, the answer was already obvious. Then how about this? Han Jin grabbed Morrison's hand and stretched it towards Leger. Han Jin's original intention was to touch Leger, but after Morrison's understood Han Jin's intention, he secretly used some strength and poked Leger. Leger was caught off guard and almost fell out of his chair. He hurriedly reached out, grabbed the table, and said angrily, Morrison's, what are you doing? Morrison smiled and pointed at Han Jin. It was obvious that Han Jin was the one who grabbed his hand and did it, so it had nothing to do with him. Han Jin was speechless for a moment, then coughed and said, Now, Leger is my friend, and you dare to hit him? So I want to hit you. Will you accept it? But I'm also your friend. Morrison shouted. Yelena couldn't help but laugh, while Han Jin's expression was a bit stiff. Morrison's, are you really stupid or just pretending? Sasu said, You don't even know this. You're smart? Can you compare to Raphael? Morrison said with a smile, If you ask me, we don't have to come over and ask Raphael. Let him make up his mind. Raphael, don't blame me. It's the 2 of them who want to know the inside story. Yes, that's what they said just now, the inside story. Sasu was about to retort, but Han Jin waved his hand and said, I can see that you guys are bored, right? It's time to find something for you guys to do. What do you want us to do? Morrison's looked happy. You'll know when the time comes, Han Jin said. Okay, go do what you need to do. Don't get in my way. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, the sun was setting in the west. It was time for dinner, and it was also the most crowded and lively time on the ship. Suddenly, an invisible wave spread from the stairs and swept across the whole room in the blink of an eye. The reason was none other than Jed's coming out. Everyone was looking at Jed's, and their expressions were more or less strange, but Jed's expression was very calm. He looked around and walked towards Han Jin's table. Yelena also wanted to sit next to Han Jin, but seeing that Jed's was one step ahead, she turned to Leslie and Lorraine's table halfway. What's going on? Jed's asked as he sat down, puzzled. Why are you all looking at me like that? Guevara and Majordomo Gale didn't have time to answer, and hurriedly moved the wine jug, wine glasses, and other things away, but the table was only so big, and it didn't seem safe to put them anywhere, so they just threw everything in their hands on the floor. You don't remember? Han Jin asked in astonishment. Remember what? Jeds asked in the same astonishment. Han Jin, Gavara, and the others looked at each other. How could drinking make someone lose their memory? Do you still remember how you got on the God of War? I remember. And then, Jeds frowned slightly, as if he was thinking about something. After a while, he shook his head and said, I can't remember. Gavara and Majordomo Gale almost fainted because Jedis never lied. If he said he couldn't remember, then he really couldn't remember. It was just that it was too funny. It turned out that it only took a few glasses of wine to defeat a strong man like Jedis. At this moment, a shrill voice sounded, My lord, it's bad, it's bad. Anyone who saw Jeds lose his composure was dumbfounded. That was Schumann's voice. Why was it here again? Turning back time, Kane's position was the closest to the side of the ship. He immediately released a levitation spell, flew off the deck, and sank down. In just a few breaths, he brought Schumann back to the deck. Surprisingly, Schumann's robe was torn in many places, and there were many bloodstains. It was unknown whether it was his or someone else's. After seeing Han Jin, Schumann couldn't wait to shout, out of control. Sir, those priests are completely out of control. Out of control? What's going on? Han Jin stood up. Schumann took a deep breath, trying to calm his rapid breathing as much as possible, and then said in a sobbing voice, Sir, quickly bring the soldiers into the city, or it will be too late. Han Jin paused, and his eyes suddenly flashed with a cold light. Schumann didn't say anything at all, and directly made a request. Obviously, the situation had reached a critical point. He couldn't help but look at Jeds. Since he was going to bring the soldiers into the city, there would definitely be a conflict with the priests. I'm no longer the Pope, Jed said softly. Chapter 441. No one could imagine that a group of people who had been living at the bottom for a long time would become so fanatical when they suddenly learned that they had the ability to break the rules. At first, some priests with ulterior motives set fire to the Lord's mansion, which had not been built yet. Most of the priests were panicked. Although Han Jin had not occupied the Holy Crown City for a long time, he was still a dignified lord, the supreme ruler of the Holy Crown City. What they did was too much. However, until the evening, Han Jin did not retaliate against them. Facts were always more persuasive than rumors. Many priests then realized that Han Jin was afraid. To be able to make a feudal lord bow his head was an unimaginable achievement for many priests. Then, their courage erupted like a volcano. Schumann's people deliberately spread rumors and tried to incite everyone. But in the end, Schumann's people began to be afraid and tried to guide the priest's emotions. However, the situation was completely out of control. This was closely related to their own quality. Before the rising sun mountains fell, the process of selecting priests by the Holy See was very strict. The priests were required to have a firm faith and a certain range of knowledge. The priests were burdened with the task of spreading the doctrines. If they did not even know what was written in the doctrines, how could they spread the doctrines? And the doctrine, no matter how the philosophers praised or criticized it, was a tool for brainwashing or not. The words in the doctrine really told people to cherish their own kind, to be honest, and to be brave to sacrifice. Therefore, priests selected from regular channels might hurt another person or another group of innocent people because of their extreme beliefs, but they would never lose all their senses and become complete thugs. But the priests in the Holy Crown City were different. In order to expand the Holy See's power as much as possible before Han Jin came back, the Holy See recruited believers without any standards and completely used benefits as bait. Come on, as a priest, you will become a member of the privileged class and even have a certain immunity. What are you hesitating for? Come on. It was conceivable that the priests recruited in this way were no longer of good quality. When it was dark, a large number of priests rushed to the streets. Some of them were ready to attack several military camps in the Holy Crown City. They wanted to drive out all the forces that obeyed Raphael, and some were ready to occupy the city hall. Theocracy was supreme. In the past, it was because that blasphemer Raphael had overestimated himself and wanted to fight against the Holy See. Now, of course, they would take back everything. Some priests even began to smash the surrounding shops. This was purely out of selfishness. Due to the sudden increase in the number of priests, the finances of the Holy See had problems. Therefore, the priests were given the right to collect donations from the merchants themselves. The problem was that the glory of God had not descended upon this area for a long time. The merchants could not avoid paying taxes to the Lord, but what was the Holy See worth? Moreover, many of the people who came to collect donations were originally hooligans on the streets. Only fools would pay. And for many priests who were in a state of invincibility, it was a good opportunity for revenge. If it was only the priests who made trouble, the scale would not be too big. But gradually, many believers also joined in. In this chaotic world, most people had a kind of hero plot. It was impossible to find a good citizen in the real sense. They lived honestly and succumbed to the shadow of the Lord and the privileged class out of reverence for the high-end power. If they were to deal with those who were similar to themselves, they would never be timid. Moreover, Hanjin had just led the army back to the Holy Crown City yesterday. A large number of troops were still stationed outside the city and did not enter the city, forming a temporary vacuum. The chaos spread out at an unimaginable speed. Schumann was the first senior official to find something wrong, and also the first one to respond. But his security team could not stop the tide of believers at all. Even he himself was injured in many places. Fortunately, those believers did not have standard weapons. At most, they attacked with sticks, hatchets, and dung forks. Otherwise, he would have been dead long ago. Schumann originally thought that he could control 600 or 700 hooligans, but they became the main force of the whole chaos. Hanjin's silence made them see that Schumann was strong in appearance, but weak in reality. Even the Lord did not dare to do anything. Schumann was nothing. The bright side of human nature could infect and inspire each other. The dark side could also spread like a virus. As long as a priest dared to loot a shop, the others would not restrain their greed. As long as a priest dared to kill, the others would raise their crude weapons. The Elysian night was still brightly lit. Although the steward Hal Lister had been missing for a long time, he had shown a strong management ability and gradually formed a pattern in the Elysian night. Schumann, who temporarily took over the Elysian night, did not need to change anything. He was only responsible for keeping watch and counting the money. And everyone knew that the boss behind the Elysian night was the Lord Raphael. No one dared to take advantage of him, and Schumann did not need to worry about being deceived. 8 tall girls stood at the entrance of the Elysian night, smiling sweetly as they welcomed every guest. In the eyes of passers-by, they were all dirty because they were the maids of the Elysian night, the kind that could be slept with as long as one paid. Of course, they would not be clean. The stone floor was polished to the point that it was like a mirror, the magical lamps emitting a magnificent light, and all kinds of crystal chandeliers hanging from the sky. The spacious corridors and walls were inlaid with all kinds of jewelry and gold. All of these left the clergy and believers dumbfounded. They even felt a little inferior. However, in the blink of an eye, they became even angrier. Why did they come to the Elysian night? It was to break all the unfairness, or to prove that they also had the right to enjoy the same life as the nobles. Now, they wanted to use force to take revenge for the discomfort caused by this magnificent scene. One of the believers rushed up and smashed the magical lamp closest to him with a wooden stick. With a crash, the priceless magical lamp turned into countless pieces and fell to the ground. The rest of the clergy and believers also rushed up and attacked everything that symbolized luxury in their sight. Some of them even used their fingers to pick at the decorations on the wall and stuff them into their pockets. There was no need to feel guilty because others were doing the same thing. There were also some believers who walked towards the maid who fell down with a hideous smile. What they wanted to do most was to satisfy the desire of the lower half of their body. However, no one dared to actually do it. Smashing, looting, and burning were understandable. They could explain it away as resisting the tyranny of Lord Raphael, but this kind of thing couldn't be explained away. However, beating and killing a young and beautiful life brought about another kind of satisfaction. Who the F***CK dares to mess around in this place? With a shout, a group of neatly dressed professionals appeared. They stood on the balcony and looked down at the believers. "Kill them," the believers shouted. They even dared to burn down the Lord's mansion, and it was fine even if it was burned down. Who would be afraid of these thugs? The professionals all drew their weapons, but their eyes were focused on the burly man in the middle, waiting for orders. The burly man frowned, seeming to be in a difficult position. The people in front of him were clergy and believers, not ordinary people. Even their manager, Hallister, had been captured by the Holy See. If he really killed a few of them, the consequences would be unimaginable. The believers below didn't care what the burly man was thinking. They had already rushed up the stairs like a tide. "Save the little girl first, quick!" the burly man shouted. There are thousands of maids here, and he couldn't remember the names of all of them. However, there was only one whose life was threatened. Of course, his brothers would understand what he meant. The professionals were just about to rush down when they suddenly saw a blur in front of their eyes. Dozens of wooden sticks and pitchforks flew towards them, mixed with a dozen burning torches. "Bastard!" The burly man was furious. He pushed his companions away and rushed up with his sword. He didn't care about the wooden sticks and pitchforks, but he couldn't be careless with the torches that were flying towards him. The decorations inside the Night of Bliss could be described as an inch of gold. If it really caused a fire, you would be done for. Silver sword light flowed out like water, proving that the burly man was an expert. At least, he had the lightning fighting technique. The dozen or so torches of the opponents fell at different points. Some flew over the heads of the professionals, some hit the wall first, and then fell down the stairs. However, the moment the sword light bloomed, it almost hit all the torches at the same time. The blazing flames were immediately scattered, and the torches were also smashed into pieces. However, the splashes of oil couldn't be controlled. They stuck to the walls and fell between the floors, leaving countless stains. The burly man grimaced and took a deep breath. Who would bear the responsibility if the Lord wanted to punish them? The believers had already caught the maids who couldn't walk, but because the burly man in front of them had displayed great strength, they didn't dare to act rashly. Amidst the screams, they dragged the maids and hurriedly retreated, exchanging glances with each other. "Let her go." The burly man barely controlled the anger in his heart and coldly said, "Then get out of here immediately. I won't pursue what happened today, otherwise, fuck you." Some of the believers immediately cursed. They were invincible in the Lord's manor, and they were also invincible here. Naturally, they wouldn't be convinced. "Brothers, don't be afraid. That guy is just trying to scare us. Come here, come here." Some of the believers shouted while jumping up and down. The burly man straightened the long sword in his hand, but his body remained where it was. The believers at the front of the line couldn't help but take a step back. In fact, both sides didn't have much confidence. One side was afraid of the other's strength, and the other side didn't dare to really hurt anyone. But seeing that the burly man didn't move, the believers began to curse again. "Set fire, burn this place," a believer shouted. "You dare," the burly man roared. "Set fire, set fire." Hearing the reminder of their companions, the believers' emotions suddenly became excited. If they were asked to attack the burly man, they really wouldn't dare. To them, the burly man was a terrifying lion, but when it came to setting fire, it became much easier. Completely ignoring the burly man's roar, torches were thrown to the side of the wall one after another. Some were even hung on the crystal chandelier, burning the gorgeous ceiling. The professionals immediately became panicked. The Night of Bliss was not a fortress, and there were no defensive facilities. If this continued, there would be a disaster. At this moment, a burly figure strode in from the door. The huge sword in his hand spun like a windmill, and the believers who were caught off guard were cut down in groups. Although the person didn't use any fighting skills, he had the advantage of being tall and long. The huge sword in his hand was big and heavy enough. With a swing of the sword, he could easily cut down several believers. There were not only believers here, but also priests. However, most of the priests were selected by these geniuses, and almost none of them practiced light magic. The only difference between them and the believers was that the latter had their own jobs and had to donate their faith every month. The former, on the other hand, worked for the Holy See and had to obey the Holy See's orders. In terms of strength, they were all ordinary people, and there was no way they could resist the slaughter of Real professionals. Miserable cries and sorrowful cries were endless. The terrified believers and priests all moved to the sides and leaned against the wall, trembling. Not everyone had the right to challenge the rules. Reality had taught them a terrible lesson. However, they might not have the chance to learn from their experience. Are you crazy? The burly man was half surprised and half frightened. A tragedy had happened here, and if the higher-ups wanted to punish him, he would have to take responsibility too. Master's orders. Morrison's laughed. Kill all the thugs. While Moxink was talking, the bright red liquid flowed down along the huge sword and dripped on the floor and the desperate maid. In the blink of an eye, Moxink had killed more than 20 followers by himself. The ground was littered with broken corpses and shrill howls, but it didn't affect him at all. His ugly big face was still smiling happily. In fact, none of Han Jin's friends, including Morrison's and Sassu, were kind people. Han Jin had already noticed it when they first met. Even Sassu, who looked the least threatening, was not afraid of being stained with the blood of others, as long as there was a good reason to do so. The reason why they had been quiet until now was because of their individual strength. They did not have the chance to show their strength. Master, who are you? The burly man asked in surprise. You don't even know me? Remember, my name is Morrison's. Morrison's said proudly as he helped the maid up. It had been a long time since he was in the limelight. Morrison's felt a sense of pride that he had not felt in a long time. He was in a good mood and even spoke to the maid politely. Are you all right? The poor maid had almost died, and she had seen Morrison's university kill people everywhere. She was lucky that she did not faint on the spot. How could she answer Morrison's question? So you are from Morrison's university. The burly man was overjoyed. He shouted, You guys put out the fire immediately. The rest of you, follow me. Kill them all. Kill these bastards. As soon as he finished speaking, the burly man jumped down from the balcony and raised his silver sword. Morrison's also raised his greatsword and rushed towards the believers. Compared to the believers who went to cause trouble at the Night of Bliss, the believers who went to attack Riptide's original camp woke up earlier. Of course, they died faster. Chipango tore a piece of cloth and wiped the blood off his dagger. He then put the dagger away and turned to Sunir. What's going on? Sunir frowned and asked. Chipango's subordinates were sweating profusely. They did not even know what was going on. Why did they start killing people without any explanation? What they didn't know was that Sunir had her own way of doing things. If you were here to reason with her, she would also reason with you. But if you were here to kill or burn, she would definitely attack at the first moment. Why would she care about those believers who were rushing in with their weapons and shouting? To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 442. After withdrawing from the battlefield, the several legions of the Holy Crown City were badly wounded, but they had sharpened their claws and teeth in the bloody battle. It was almost effortless for them to deal with a group of unworthy priests. Since Han Jin gave the order, it had been less than half an hour since the riot that affected the whole city had subsided. In the square in front of the city hall, in the barracks, In the two main roads going from north to south, east to west, and other streets, there were corpses of priests and believers everywhere. The priests were completely dumbfounded by the slaughter. Some of the smarter ones desperately fled to the location of the Holy See, which was not only their spiritual support, but also their shelter. However, the hundreds of fully armed and highly alert Knights of the Light shattered the clergy's fantasies. The two paladins, Amij and Adonis, coldly looked at the crowd that was gathering from all directions. They did not move an inch despite the clergy's curses and pleas. The Knights of the Light formed a wall of steel behind them. They were using their silent language to tell the clergy who were anxious to seek shelter that this path was not to be crossed. The crisp sound of hooves came from afar. The Knights of the Riptide Regiment had arrived. They did not slow down at all. Their raised lances glinted coldly under the moonlight. Without hesitation, they thrust their lances at the panicked priests. This was the location of the Holy See. If it were other smart people, they would have carefully considered whether they should not use such drastic means. The commanders of the legions under Han Jin all had their own shortcomings. Some were weak, and some were ignorant of military affairs. However, when it came to carrying out Han Jin's orders, they were more resolute than the other. Lang Ning and Alexander took it as their duty to obey orders, while Winston and Saxon still had their wild nature. They regarded Han Jin as their boss. If their boss ordered them to kill someone, they would definitely kill. What if they got into trouble? They didn't care so much. Flowers of blood blossomed, one after another. The priests and believers were either stabbed by the knights' lances or knocked down by the heavily armored warhorses. Then, they were trampled into meat paste by the iron hooves that came one after another as they struggled helplessly and howled. The killing field was less than 30 meters away from the Knights of Light. Seeing the priests being slaughtered in front of their eyes, the Knights of Light suffered a great psychological impact. Many knights clenched their knight spears, but they didn't have the courage to rush out and stop it. Of course, this was also because they hadn't received the order. If Adonis had nodded, they would have already rushed out. Although the actions of the priests in front of them were shocking, they should be punished by the Holy See. No one else had the right to interfere with the internal affairs of the Holy See. Some of the priests who panicked and didn't know where to go rushed toward Amij and Adonis. But halfway there, Riptide's knights caught up. One by one, they fell into a pool of blood. One of the priests who ran the fastest had already reached the head of Amij's horse. Just as he stretched out his arms and begged for Amij's help, another knight caught up and mercilessly swung his knight spear. Blood splattered all over Amij's boots. A small commotion broke out among the Knight of Light. This was too much. They were simply ignoring Lord Amij's existence. Amij's expression remained calm. He didn't look at the knight, who almost collided with him. Instead, he raised his head and looked up at the sky. The Knight of Light suddenly felt his vision darken. A huge figure had appeared above them at some point, blocking the bright moonlight and casting them into a shadow. Then, Riptide's charging formation stiffened. Many knights forcibly reined in their horses and raised their knight spears. Knights usually did this to show their obedience and respect to their superiors. A figure walked out of Riptide's charging formation and slowly approached the gates of the Holy See. When he saw the person, Amij let out an imperceptible sigh. Then, he slowly retracted his right arm and raised his knight's spear to his side. The moment the figure appeared, not only Amij, but most of the Knight of Light recognized him. After the first conflict between Han Jin and Aud, the Knight of Light and the Bishop of Light had done a lot of homework in order to avoid a similar situation from happening again. At the very least, they had to ensure that they could recognize Han Jin at any time and place. Moreover, Han Jin didn't want to hide anything now. Instead, he wore a suit of tailored armor and a heavy cloak that carried an invisible pressure. The most eye-catching thing was the knight's shield on Han Jin's left arm. The knight's shield was engraved with a lion with wings. In the light, it seemed to be alive, as if it could jump out at any time. Han Jin also had a pendant around his neck. A miniature angel statue was hanging in front of Han Jin's chest, emitting a terrifying holy aura. When Amij raised his knight's spear, Adonis slowly turned around and stared deeply at Amij. However, Amij didn't seem to feel Adonis' stare. His eyes didn't blink, as if he was looking at Hanjin, who was getting closer and closer. It was as if he was looking through everyone's bodies, through the city, and into nothingness. In a few breaths' time, Hanjin was less than 10 meters away from Amij and Adonis. Veins popped out on the back of Adonis' hand, and his face kept changing, as if he was struggling with something. Only a few dozen Radiant Knights followed Amij and raised their spears. Most of the Radiant Knights were staring at Adonis' back. When Hanjin had asked Amij to lead a group of Radiant Knights to accompany the army, his main purpose was to let Amij establish his prestige. However, the plan had changed. After the Dragon Field attacked the Vatican, the Knights of Faith immediately returned to the Vatican. Amij didn't have the chance or time to organize his Radiant Knights. Seeing that Hanjin was getting closer and closer, the statue-like Amij suddenly moved and turned his head to look at Adonis. These two knight paladins, one old and one young, were very interesting. Earlier, it was Adonis who was looking at Amij, and Amij pretended not to know anything. Now, it was Adonis' turn to remain silent. Finally, when the distance between the two sides was reduced to 5 meters, Adonis slowly raised his knight's spear. However, his movements were very slow, as if there was a heavy object hanging from the tip of the spear. Hanjin didn't look at Adonis or Amij. He directly walked past them. Adonis smiled bitterly and gestured for the Knights of Light to make way. He didn't care about Hanjin's attitude towards him. He had rushed here as soon as the riot broke out, and of course, he was here to talk to the Holy See. In the entire Holy See, other than Jed's, there was only one other person who was qualified to talk to Hanjin. The Radiant Knights moved aside like a stream of water, and the cardinals behind them also moved aside. The distance from the Vatican's main building to the gate was about a few hundred meters. This road was where the last of the Vatican's elite forces and inheritors were gathered. Hanjin had an illusion that he was back on the battlefield, facing the behemoth warriors who were fighting with their backs to the wall. He knew that as long as Adolf gave the order, these believers would unleash a frenzy that would not be any weaker than the behemoth warriors. Hanjin wasn't tall, and he didn't pretend to walk. His footsteps were very light, like a breeze, like a passerby that could be ignored. However, countless eyes stared at Hanjin without blinking, their gazes full of reverence. With every step Hanjin took, the true believers felt their hearts grow heavier. Raphael, this young lord, is not to be trifled with. This was the consensus of all the believers. Killing the Blood Clan's ancestor Alquite, killing the Dragon City's Elder Maxwell, severely injuring the Holy Knight Aud, and facing the siege of the Golden Blood Clan alone. All of this was enough to prove how strong and decisive this handsome young man was. Before Hanjin walked in, the believers had always believed that the ascetic Adolf's power was definitely above Hanjin's, and had to be above Hanjin's, so there was no need for them to worry or be afraid. However, now that Hanjin was exuding such a carefree aura, their willpower was wavering. Could it really be possible? Could Adolf really control this young man? If not, then the rebellious priest had already caused a disaster. Who would bear the terrible anger? After a while, Hanjin had already walked to the front of the main building. The few Knights of Light who were guarding the door showed a look of fear. Should they block him or not? They weren't afraid that they would be severely injured by Hanjin like the Holy Knight Aud. Even if they were to die, they wouldn't be afraid. However, now that the conflict had become so intense, if they were to do anything extreme, it would be very likely that things would get out of hand. If everyone could only be responsible for their own actions and not implicate others, then the place where Hanjin walked would already be littered with corpses. This was because the believers believed that Hanjin was here to settle accounts with Adolf. However, they couldn't bring destruction to the supreme faith. Compared to the inheritance of the Holy See, not only them, but also the lives of the ascetic Adolf were negligible. Before the few Knights of Light could react, Hanjin had already slowly walked up the stairs and gently pushed the door open. The door was filled with stars, and the moonlight poured down like water. In the Battle of the Dragon Field attacking the Holy See, the roof of the main building had almost completely collapsed. The stone slabs that should have been as smooth as a mirror were covered with dust. There were also countless bricks of different sizes and thick and thin beams. It was a mess. The giant statue of the Archangel Alpha in the middle was also severely damaged. Several pairs of wings were incomplete, and only half of its head was left. Not knowing whether it was because of the lack of funds or the lack of energy, the main building had not been repaired. Or perhaps Adolf had deliberately preserved this place as a warning to future generations. A thin figure stood in front of the collapsed main seat, looking up at the sky. It seemed that the attraction of the starry sky was far greater than the uninvited guest behind him. Han Jin slowly walked over the broken debris and walked to the side of the figure. He also raised his head and looked at the starry sky. Their eyes flickered at the same time. Demigod-rank powerhouses were already the strongest existences in the continent. Any two demigod-rank powerhouses walking together would become a special event. However, the two parties involved didn't have this awareness. One was like a light and agile wind, while the other was like still water without ripples. It was as if they couldn't see each other at all. After an unknown period of time, Han Jin smiled and slowly withdrew his gaze from the starry sky. At this time, a statue not far in front of him attracted his attention. He stepped forward and saw a line of words engraved on the base of the statue. The first sentence was half destroyed, as if it had been engraved from somewhere. However, the last sentence was very clear. Towards eternity. I like this sentence, Han Jin said lightly. His fingertips brushed across the line of words. A slight cracking sound was heard, and the hard stone under Han Jin's fingertips turned into smoke and dust. Soon, the line of words was completely erased. This was a provocation. I like it, so others can't like it. Or, I like it, so others don't deserve to like it. Or, Alpha the Archangel doesn't deserve it. As the head of the angels, why doesn't Alpha the Archangel deserve it? Is it because he's just a lackey or something? Han Jin's action was simple, but his intention was unclear. However, he obviously did not care what Adolf thought. Adolf's gaze moved down little by little. He did not stop Han Jin's rude action, but only quietly stared at Han Jin's back. Han Jin's fingertips suddenly stopped there. His heart was touched by something inexplicable. Eternity, the original motivation of cultivation, came from the reluctance and attachment to life. However, reluctance and attachment obviously did not have the profound meaning of eternity. Could it be that cultivation was just to have endless life? Han Jin's mind exploded at this moment. Countless thoughts flooded into his mind. Why? Why was the body that carried thoughts so fragile? Birth, aging, illness, and death, earthquakes, landslides, floods, storms, and the killing and persecution of the same kind. All kinds of natural and man-made disasters could easily cause one or even countless flowers of life to wither. Even if there were 1,000 kinds of joy, how could that shallow nourishment compare to the depth of suffering? Han Jin seemed to have caught something, but at the same time, he seemed to be confused. His body was stiff and motionless, as if he was another statue, reflecting the afterimage of Alpha, the Archangel of Power. The light in Adolf's eyes gradually dimmed. Then he slowly closed his eyes. Do you think you've won? I don't want to do anything to the Holy See, so there's no need to talk about winning or losing. Han Jin came to his senses. He withdrew his fingertips and calmly replied, Is that so? Then why did you waste so much effort? Adolf's eyes were still closed. However, he was too old. His eyebrows and eyelashes had almost all fallen off. His face and forehead were covered with deep wrinkles, as if someone had cut his face countless times. As a result, his closed eyelids disappeared into the wrinkles, making it impossible to accurately determine the position of his eyes. This scene was extremely weird. If it was not Han Jin who was talking to him, but an ordinary girl, she would probably be scared out of her wits. I don't think it's very difficult. Han Jin smiled. It was stupid to deny what he had done in front of Adolf. Not only did he look down upon Adolf, but he also looked down upon himself. To be exact, most of the people who died tonight were from the Holy Crown City. If the same thing happens several times, the prosperous Holy Crown City will be ruined in your hands. Adolf said slowly. You really don't regret it? If this can curb your ambition, it's worth it to pay a price. Han Jin's eyes were full of playfulness as they fell on Adolf's bare feet. He had heard from Solomon that Adolf had the saint's boots. Was this the reason why Adolf was always barefoot? Ambition? Ha! Adolf couldn't help but chuckle. Then, isn't it better to be thorough? Han Jin was stumped. He knew what Adolf meant. Of course, a dead person would not have any ambition. However, the problem was that he didn't want to completely fall out with the Holy See. In the process of fighting against the Abyss world, in the process of his expansion, he needed the Holy See's help. Moreover, he admired Jed's from the bottom of his heart. It would be a tragedy to hurt such a pure person, a pure believer, or even be hurt. I know that you gave Amijay some magic scrolls that allowed him to increase his strength faster. Adolf said softly. Yes, Han Jin replied casually. You also helped Jed's, and you didn't have the intention to completely destroy the Holy See today. In other words, you need help. You need a stronger Holy See? Adolf let out a low laugh. So, the one with ambition isn't me, it's you, me? Han Jin shrugged. You still don't know me. I'm not interested in power. You're deliberately confusing my question. To you, a moderately strong Holy See is a suitable weapon. Adolf slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were clear and bright. He looked very young, and could even be said to be full of childlike innocence. It was a sharp contrast to his skin. Otherwise, why didn't you give the magic scrolls to Adonis and Odd? Because I like Amijay, Han Jin laughed. It's my thing, and I can give it to whoever I want. Isn't that wrong? Your tone sounds a bit like a child in a fit of pique. Adolf said softly. Also, if you really don't care about power, why must you reject the glory of God? I like to be in charge of myself. This is my habit. This isn't a good habit. A person without faith is scary, you know? You're living next to the devil. Adolf smiled. Sometimes, an overly stubborn belief is even scarier than the devil. Han Jin replied faintly. For example, the former pope, Tuya. What faith did he have? Adolf said in a sarcastic tone. He was just like you. There was only desire in his heart. He was determined to spread God's glory across the entire continent. Isn't this a desire in itself? Han Jin smiled. In fact, living under God's glory doesn't seem to be as beautiful as the teachings say. Adolf was silent for a moment. That's because God's will needs to be fulfilled through people. You mean? Han Jin paused and laughed out loud. It's always because of the wrong people that problems arise. It has nothing to do with God. God is never wrong. It's only people who are wrong. Adolf didn't answer, but his eyes gradually became stern. Sir Adolf, as the owner of the Holy Crystal, you should know where your power comes from. Han Jin smiled freely, but his eyes were as sharp as knives. Also, do the high and mighty gods really only know how to give alms and not ask for anything in return? Chapter 443. Adolf took a deep breath and said word by word, I was wrong about you. You were a blasphemer through and through. When he said the last word, Adolf's tone had become extremely cold. His eyes narrowed in his slits again, but this time they were not completely closed. The cold light from the slits was sharper than the tip of a needle. If you think I am someone who can be easily fooled, then you are wrong. Han Jin's hands hung naturally by his sides. His heavy cloak trembled slightly as he clenched his fists. And I have to tell you that if one day the continent regains its peace and everyone can live a peaceful and happy life, it will be because of the efforts of the humans. It will have nothing to do with the God you believe in. Adolf shut his mouth. At this moment, words were meaningless. A believer with a firm belief met a blasphemer through and through. There was only one outcome for both of them, which was to fight to the death. Indescribable waves of energy rolled out from Adolf's body. The dust accumulated in the entire hall shook violently, causing the air to become turbid. The door that Hanjin did not close closed with a loud bang. The giant statue of Alpha swayed back and forth as if it would fall to the ground at any time. Adolf had unleashed his power to the extreme. Of course, his goal was to use his actions to defend his belief. Hanjin stood there with a smile, not moving an inch. Before his power was unleashed, it was silent. Therefore, judging from the momentum of both sides, Hanjin was at an absolute disadvantage. However, his eyes were full of pity and mockery. At this moment, there was a faint cry of surprise from outside. Obviously, the Knight of Light and the Cardinal Bishops had noticed that something was wrong. However, no one dared to barge in. A duel between two demigods was not something they could participate in. Adolf's momentum suddenly stagnated. An almost unsolvable problem appeared in his mind. Should he endure the humiliation for the sake of the seed of God's grace? Or should he resolutely fight to the death without compromising with any evil? Although he rarely participated in church affairs, Adolf himself had a wealth of experience. On the first day he stepped into the church, he could see the extent of support Hanjin had for the church from the size of the area, the number of buildings, the financial situation, and other information. Later, he learned about the friendship between Hanjin and Jed's and the care he took for Amy. He judged that Hanjin needed the church. That was why he had done so. He wanted more so that the church could recover faster. Otherwise, he would not be so abrupt. A firm belief and a lack of brains were two different things. However, now that he understood that Hanjin was a complete blasphemer, he began to doubt his original judgment. Would such a fallen devil really not destroy the church? Adolf knew very well that the church was safe before he unleashed his attack. Hanjin had made it clear just now. He played so many tricks just to curb Adolf's ambition and make the church more obedient. However, after he unleashed his attack, everything would become unknown. The rise and fall of the church was on his shoulders. This choice was too painful. The countless deep wrinkles on Adolf's face were already overflowing with sweat. They were like silk threads, shining brightly under the moonlight. He had come all the way here to revive the church, not to push the church into the abyss of destruction. However, his faith did not allow him to compromise with evil. What should he do? In fact, Adolf had underestimated Hanjin. He only thought that a young man with great ambitions would be good at uniting all the forces that could be united. Therefore, he gradually tested Hanjin's bottom line, trying to get as much as possible for the church as possible. The more aggressive his methods were at the beginning, the more room for maneuvering. Every concession he made would make Hanjin feel relieved and even grateful. However, when the two sides were really at daggers drawn, Adolf realized that he was in an extremely disadvantageous situation. What Hanjin had gambled was only his friendship with Jedis, and a weapon that could easily stab him if he wasn't careful. Adolf, on the other hand, had gambled everything he had. It wasn't fair. Adolf's fists were loosening and clenching, but his momentum was slowly weakening. Who had the confidence to kill a demigod who had a life puppet and could be protected by Mother Earth at any time? Not to mention Adolf alone, even several demigod experts together might not be able to do it. Moreover, even if he killed Hanjin, what could he do? Could he guarantee that he would not be hurt? Then, who would bear the counterattack of the Holy Crown City at all costs? Moreover, there was Grand Duke Solomon in the distance. Maybe it was because of Adolf's hesitation and pain, the pity in Hanjin's eyes became even stronger, as if he had already expected this scene. Then, he strode forward. In fact, he could have changed his direction, but he didn't. He just walked slowly towards Adolf and smiled, showing his shining white teeth, which made him look like a wild beast that couldn't restrain its ferocious heart. "Don't block my way," Hanjin said. Adolf's eyes suddenly widened, and a wave of madness spread out from his body. But it was only for a moment, and he controlled his emotions, took a step back, and said slowly, Lord Raphael, I can guarantee that there won't be a next time. Han Jin's words were, of course, a double entendre, and Adolf's answer also had a hidden meaning. I stepped aside just to make way for you, and it didn't mean anything else. It was absolutely impossible to force the Holy Crown to be your obedient slave. Han Jin smiled, passed by Adolf, and walked forward slowly. When he was only 10 meters away from the gate, he suddenly turned back and said lightly, "Adolf, you don't know who I am." Adolf snorted coldly. In his 100 years of life, he had never suffered such humiliation. He was not threatening anyone just now, and there would not be a next time. Even if Han Jin couldn't defeat him, he could still lead the Holy Crown City to find another way to develop. Han Jin flicked his fingertips, and a sacred aura that Adolf was very familiar with suddenly surged in the hall. Two angels of almost the same height, completely condensed by dense white light, appeared in front of Han Jin. Without the restriction of the magic array, the angel's power could be fully released. Two pairs of 10-meter-long wings of light gently flapped, emitting a strong pressure. The messy bricks and rubble were quickly blown away, revealing pieces of stone slabs. Even the huge piled-up beams were pushed away. The broken walls creaked, as if they were about to collapse. Then, with a loud bang, the gate, which could only be opened from the inside, was broken by an invisible force, and the door flew out. Impossible! Adolf uttered a hoarse cry. His face seemed to have been punched, and countless wrinkles were twisted together. As an ascetic, Adolf knew a lot of secrets that others didn't know, such as the divine armament. Some knowledgeable people only knew that with a full set of divine armament, one could get close to or even touch the limit of the world. And the divine armament had another name, the law. However, those people didn't know how to get the law power and why to get the law power. There were 6 sets of divine armament, and each set could summon an angel to help in battle. And this kind of angel couldn't be killed unless the set was completely destroyed. When the divine armament was collected, the angel seal would be completely opened, and the 6 angels would merge together and become a powerful angel. The power of a powerful angel could no longer be described as powerful, but great. It was a great existence second only to God. A powerful angel even had the power to change the rules of the world. However, being able to summon an angel wasn't enough to shock Adolf. In fact, Adolf also recognized the Lion King's shield and the glorious pendant, but he remained silent. What shocked him was that the power released by the 2 angels seemed to have broken through the seal. And the most unbelievable thing was the actions of the 2 angels. They actually knelt in front of Han Jin. Although their bodies were still taller than Han Jin's, it couldn't hide their humility and respect. Their incomparably noble heads were now deeply bowed, and that posture was as if they were serving. Adolf didn't dare to say it, or even think about it. He was afraid that if he had any thoughts, he wouldn't be able to atone for his sins, even if he fell into hell. Adolf had the saint's boots, and he had also summoned angels to help in battle. But how could the angels, who symbolized the divine will, kneel down to a mortal? The door was knocked open, and the Knight of Light and the Cardinal were lucky enough to see an unforgettable scene. 2 powerful angels were kneeling in front of Raphael, the Lord of the Holy Crown City, while their savior, the ascetic Adolf, showed a horrified look. His face was twisted like a broken eggshell, and his body was shaking. Impossible? You don't even believe your own eyes? Han Jin smiled. Adolf, you are more stubborn than I thought. After that, Han Jin slowly walked out. The 2 angels slowly stood up and floated behind Han Jin. The Knight of Light and the Cardinal also understood how absurd it was for the angels to kneel down to a mortal. Life was just an ant, and God was the supreme ruler. How could it be the other way around and bow its noble head to a mortal? If Han Jin's figure was replaced by Jedis, all the Knight of Light and the Cardinal would have knelt down on the ground. From today onwards, wherever Jedis pointed, they would rush there without hesitation, without any doubt. They would not regret it, even if they were smashed into pieces, because their souls and hearts had already regarded Jedis as the avatar of God. However, Hanjin was not Jedis. Strictly speaking, Hanjin might even become the enemy of the Holy See. What was wrong with this world? The Knight of Light and the Cardinal were dumbfounded, but the two obedient angels did not allow them to block Hanjin's path. An invisible pressure emanated from their bodies, pushing the mini Knight of Light and the Cardinal to the ground. Of course, in this unimaginable situation, the Knight of Light and the Cardinal forgot to resist. Their eyes were blank as they staggered back. Hanjin did not go far, but in Adolf's eyes, Hanjin's back was already blurred. Hanjin's words repeatedly exploded in Adolf's mind, making him dizzy. His back, which had been straight for decades, became bent. You don't know who I am. You don't know who I am, for a believer who valued faith above all else. What could be more shocking than this? It was not a matter of whether he was experienced or not, nor was it a matter of whether he was shrewd or not. Decades of persistence had determined that he was on the verge of collapse at this moment. As the supreme leader of all believers, even the Pope had to bow down in front of the angel. But what about the angel? The god of war did not leave, because it had a high vantage point, and because most of the main building had collapsed in the previous battle. Even if the door was not open, Jedis could still clearly see what was happening inside. His face was as dull as the cardinal's. How was this possible? Angels were extremely proud and powerful creatures. Even if they were corrupted and turned into fallen angels, they would not give up their self-esteem. They would rather die than live in dishonor. This was the most vivid portrayal of an angel. During the battle of attacking the Holy Crown City, Bismarck summoned angels. Angels could fight for him, and they could even attack the believers of the Vatican. However, if Bismarck spoke indiscriminately and hurt the dignity of the angels, then the angels would most likely give up on the enemy and attack Bismarck instead. In the minds of angels, there is absolutely no concept of Lord. They would not be slaves to anyone because they were the proudest beings in the world. Under the gaze of countless people, the two angels slowly stretched out their wings of light, supported Hanjin, and then flew into the air towards the god of war. The moment they stepped on the deck, Hanjin waved his right hand, and the two angels immediately disappeared without a trace, just as abrupt as their appearance. Jedis could not help but look at the sky. He remembered that when Bismarck summoned angels from the Lion King's shield, the gate of heaven appeared in the sky. How could Hanjin summon angels at will? What kind of magic did Hanjin have? Guevara and the others were also surprised, but they did not lose the ability to control their emotions like the believers. Only Yelena showed a calm smile. She had already seen angels bow down to Hanjin. Hanjin turned around and looked down, then suddenly said, "Jedis." "What?" Jedis immediately woke up and coughed a few times to hide his emotions. At this moment, he had already determined that Hanjin's past was definitely not as simple as others said, but he did not want to ask anything. People should always look forward, and the future was far more important than the past. If Hanjin was willing to tell him, he would certainly listen. If Hanjin did not want to say, he would choose to bury all the questions in the bottom of his heart. "You resign from the position of Pope?" Hanjin smiled and said, "Now is not the time to lose your temper. There are too many things for you to deal with, and I can only trust the Vatican with you here. If you leave, what's the point of the Vatican to me?" Hanjin was speaking from the bottom of his heart. In addition to various reasons, the most important factor in choosing to cooperate with the Vatican was his trust in Jedis' character. I know. Jedis sighed slowly. From the god of war, they could clearly see that all the Light Knight and cardinals below were still collectively looking up at the god of war. Even Adonis and Amijay had not recovered from the shock. "Are you going to clean up the mess now, or are you coming with us first?" Hanjin paused and said, "How about we go back and have a few drinks? To be honest, I'm getting more and more interested in you. Such a high alcohol tolerance. It's rare to see a man like you." Although Jedis had controlled his emotions in time, perhaps because of his unexpected strength, or perhaps because of other reasons, he felt very unfamiliar with Hanjin. However, Han Jin's words slightly diluted his unfamiliarity, and Jedis simply replied, "In your dreams." After saying this, Jedis had already cast the flight spell. Han Jin actually wanted to force him to drink. It was obvious that he wanted to drive him away. If he continued to stay, something bad would definitely happen. "All right, don't forget to send Howlister back to me." Han Jin smiled and said, "I think no one will stop you now." "All right." Jeds nodded, and then his body began to descend. "Let's go to the city hall." Han Jin turned around and said. Then he thought of something and said, "Hogan, is there any news of Blanche? I didn't see Aud just now. He should be with Blanche." "Master, there is no news of Blanche. If there isn't, then let them continue to search." Han Jin said, "In the future, don't wait for me to remind you of this kind of thing. You should know what to do." "Understood, Master." Hogan hurriedly retreated and waved his hand to call over two magicians. He whispered a few words to them, and the two magicians cast a flight spell and flew away from the God of War. Of course, they couldn't only rely on the two of them to find Blanche. Their responsibility was to pass on Han Jin's orders to the various legions. "Raphael, didn't you say that you would give Blanche her freedom and not disturb them?" Yelena asked curiously. "There should be a limit to freedom. I haven't seen Blanche for so long, and I'm worried that something might have happened." Han Jin frowned slightly. "Since she's with Aud, it shouldn't be." At that moment, a dazzling magic signal rose from the city and flew into the sky. It was the location of Riptide's original barracks. However, the signal didn't mean that it was a call for help. As long as an unknown person tried to approach Chi Li and Sylvia, Chipango would release the signal immediately. Interesting. They can't wait to jump out after seeing the chaos tonight. Very good. Han Jin sneered. Stillberg, turn around immediately. "Yes, young master." Stillberg replied and immediately adjusted the direction of the God of War, flying towards the barracks in the distance. "Yesterday, my brother told me to go to Baidu and have a look. He saw pictures of the characters in the book, but he didn't know if they were copyrighted. If they were the original author, he could buy them with money because I wanted to change the cover of the book a long time ago. I went there and found that the chapter 1 just updated. In less than 10 minutes, there was a pirated post. I can't figure out how it was done. Maybe it was a cheat. Scary. I feel a chill all over my body. Technology is getting more and more awesome. It turns out that the advantage of the original website has unknowingly become so weak. I didn't know that the support I received was so worthy of being moved. From the bottom of my heart, thank you to everyone who tipped and subscribed. Thank you. Thank you very much." Although this line of work is very tiring, it is a great happiness to be able to do what I like. As long as there is a chance to persevere, I will not give up. Thank you for your support and for giving me the opportunity to choose, allowing me to let go of everything and pursue my own happiness. Here, I wish you all success and good luck every year. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.